Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hey, it's Celebrate Truth Radio, and I'm your host, Robbie Davidson. We've got an awesome show for you tonight. We've got the special guest, Richard Hopkins, Mr. Thrive and Survive on YouTube. If you're not familiar, it's going to be amazing. We're going to be hitting so many different topics tonight over the next 2, maybe even 3 hours. We'll see in the after show we might do on YouTube. We'll see how it all goes, but don't go anywhere. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio. That's right. The world's been going crazy, and we've been documenting it every week here on Celebrate Truth Radio. And tonight, actually, we have not had Rich Hopkins on the show. So this is long overdue. We had a great 5-hour chat the other night after he had done a special report on the oil crisis that was going on in the world. And we ended up talking for, I think, just roughly over 5 hours. We talked about so many great topics, and I thought, hey, this is great to get this information out. Rich is so knowledgeable. Before he was doing anything even on flat earth and all the stuff that he's been covering over the last 4 or 5 years, he was heavily involved in understanding economics, financial assets, just a whiz when it comes to looking at the Elliott waves, understanding different cycles, and really, really privileged and honored to have Richard Hopkins on with us tonight. Richard, thanks so much for coming on to Celebrate Truth Radio.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
It's going to be amazing. Like I said, if it's anything like the 5-hour chat we had the other night, we should have actually almost had that recorded.
Yeah, it would have put a lot of people to sleep, I guess, after about the 3rd or 4th hour.
Well, I don't know. Some people like the marathons, especially when all of a sudden everyone's on lockdown and they got nothing but time. So sometimes it works out good when they have the 5-6 hour marathons. People really enjoy that. But we're going to cover so many different topics tonight. I thought, just to start off, maybe you could just do a little bit of an introduction, how you got onto YouTube and really what you've done over the years, because a lot of people with this audience would probably know you through, the Flat Earth International Conferences that I brought you out to speak at throughout the years, but then also the work that you've done on your YouTube channel going back, I don't know, how long have you been on YouTube?
I started, I believe it was 2008 is when I started my channel. And I was talking strictly about economic stuff then, how to prepare. That's where the name Thrive and Survive came from. And that came about because about 4 years earlier, I discovered that I should be probably looking into something tangible, hard assets like gold and silver, that type of thing, because I could see that the fiat currency system was eventually going to go bust. And so what I did was I started studying economic cycles and what stands up and what doesn't stand up, what people do when financial crises come. And it's pretty much the same since the central bank was created back in 1913, when the Federal Reserve really came into being. Even the crises before then, you have in the late 1800s, you've got things that were thrown at the economy. You had boom and bust cycles, but they were still central banks. It wasn't Federal Reserve, but there were several federal banks that caused the boom bust cycle, and actually some of the United States government actually kicked them out. Then they came back, and then of course they came back for good, at least for now anyway, since 1913 under the Federal Reserve. They really thought it through well that at that point, calling it Federal Reserve, so people thought it was actually the government.
Wasn't it Jackson? Wasn't it Jackson that went up against the Federal Reserve early on?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was one, and I think maybe McKinley. It's been so long since I looked at that part of it, who actually they were, but. Sure enough, whenever it was a central bank system, when it wasn't a constitutional system, the way it's supposed to work is the government issues money, And if they issue too much, then you would have inflation. And then who's responsible is those who issue too much, the representatives. So that was the check and balance. They could be voted out of office if they didn't keep the economy going right.
Mm-hmm.
So, at that point, now the politicians, they don't care. They can blame it all on the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can blame it on the Federal Reserve can blame it on this virus.
Correct.
And that's what they're going to do. But it's the fault of the Federal Reserve. If when you have constitutional money, there is no debt whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we still have constitutional money. Most people don't know it. It's the coins in circulation. They're actually minted by the Treasury. They are not connected to the Federal Reserve whatsoever. But that's it. Those coins, of course, that's limited. And when Kennedy tried to put gold or put silver in those coins, or keep it in there and go to possibly a silver standard, you see what happened to Kennedy.
Yeah. I was going to say, when it comes to coins, I mean, most of the dimes that people are carrying right now has zero silver in them.
Correct. Yeah. Since 1964, just after they killed him, all the silver went away in coins.
Yeah, well, and this is something we've seen, all throughout history. This is what governments do. They dilute the currency, right? So we're in a modern day age where they are doing the same thing and it's not even printing anymore. We were talking about this, as far as they don't even have to print money anymore. They can just add zeros in a computer.
Exactly. Just this digital nonsense. The problem is that they create debt. If your currency says note, Federal Reserve note, a note is debt. They never create the interest. So even if you can understand one transaction, you go buy a house for $200,000. Where's that money come from? Well, someone gets a loan for $200,000. That's just type zeros in an account.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, so if there's just two people in the economy, the buyer and the seller of that house, then all of a sudden now there's $200,000 in circulation that goes to the seller. But then the buyer, he's got to come up with $200,000 plus another $800,000, depending on the interest rate, over 30 years. So he's got to come up with $1 million to pay that house off. But yet there's only $200,000 in circulation, so you can see the problem.
Correct. And they'll say that they're trying to ward off deflation by inflating the currency. Maybe you can speak to that. As far as what they're doing. We all know this is reckless, but maybe some listeners that are tuning in tonight don't understand maybe even the difference between deflation and inflation, or even what those mean.
Right. Technically, inflation is whenever you print more money. So that has been going on exponentially since, well, let's just call it since the late 1990s. Mm-hmm. It just keeps exponentially going higher. It's a hockey stick on the chart, and now it's really a hockey stick.
Yeah.
But that is not the same as price inflation. Now, they've manipulated the numbers, and they keep changing how they calculate price inflation so that people don't realize how much their money is going down in value. Mm-hmm. However, what's been going on, especially since 2008, when they really started quantitative easing, which just means billions and trillions rather of dollars being printed to bail out whoever needs to be bailed out. But during the 2008 financial crisis, that inflation never made it to Main Street because they were very good at keeping that money circulating around the elite, so to speak, the elite bankers, those on Wall Street, big corporations, and they circulated it mostly amongst themselves. Very, very little of it trickled down to anybody else, so you didn't get the price inflation. Mm-hmm. But you got asset inflation, and wherever that went. For example, a lot of it bailed out the stock market. Mm-hmm. What happened? The stock market went from, what was the low, 6,000 something in 2000, early 2009. The low was, I think it was around 6,600, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that, but it was pretty low. But and then since then it's gone up to close to 30,000.
Correct.
So when you look at the values of these companies, there's what are called PE ratios and things like that give you what a fair price is of those assets. They're nowhere near what the cost of the stock is. For example, let's just take company XYZ. They should be trading at $75 a share, mm-hmm. but they're trading at $280 a share because of all the liquidity, all the money that has gone in from all this printing. Mm-hmm. Now, what they have done is they have leaked enough in for the rest of us so that we don't get deflation. since Ben Bernanke, in particular, who studied the Great Depression, that's where we get Helicopter Ben from. He'll send helicopters of money. He came up with that because he studied the Great Depression, and he said, "I'm never going to let that happen again. Because what happened during the Great Depression was the Federal Reserve, and we talked about this on our call. They actually caused the depression. It wasn't the stock market crash.
Correct.
The stock market crash happened in 1929, and it started going back up, and everything was fine until 1931, 1932. What happened was during that period of time, the Federal Reserve started cutting the monetary supply.
Yeah.
So you had less and less dollars in circulation, and you had a lowering of what's called the velocity of money. People lost confidence, so they didn't want to spend the money. They wanted to hoard it. So the velocity of money is just transactions. How many transactions are happening? If you get $1,000, you spend $1,000 right away, and then somebody else you give it to spend it. If they do it and that keeps going, that's a high velocity of money. Well, the inverse of that happened during the Great Depression. So Ben Bernanke, knowing that, said he would just keep pumping dollars in.
Yeah.
Now, if you know what that causes, eventually there's a lag period. Eventually, that causes a deterioration in the currency's value, and if you do it too much, which they have, there's no turning back now. It collapses the currency.
Yeah.
And the thing is, does it go into deflation first and then hyperinflation? You end up at the same place either way. You end up with a hyperinflationary depression at the end.
Correct.
But the thing is, do you start off with inflation right off the bat and it just zooms up, or do you go through a depression? I think we're going to go through the 1970s type of deal first. That was called stagflation.
Correct.
And
maybe explain that. Yeah.
Yeah, stagflation is high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. In fact, Jimmy Carter came up with what's called the misery index. And you felt miserable in the late 1970s, if anyone's old enough to remember it. You had very poor job. I mean, jobs were hard to get, and if you got a job, it was really a market for the employers. You didn't want to leave a job if you got one, but your wages didn't go up because employers would get 50 people to replace you. And so that was the misery index, and that's where I think we're headed right now. And we may end up not at first with inflation, but what they're doing now is they're sending stimulus checks out for the first time.
Correct.
So every single person in the United States, either working or on Social Security or filed a tax form, they don't even have to be working now, in the last 2 years, they're going to get $1,200 per adult and $500 per child. And it's going to be interesting because we're in a situation right now where the supply chain is starting to break down. And we're starting to get reports of problems with meat packers and meat getting to market.
I wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up on tonight's show because, I believe, by the end of the month, there is definitely going to be some, meat shortages. I think it will be short-lived, but I still think it's something that we should bring up on this show, that if you're going to get some, get some now, because there's no doubt here in Canada, also the U.S., multiple countries are basically saying by the end of the month, there is going to be meat shortages. The good news is, though, it is going to be short-lived. So it's not like this is going to last for months and months. It probably will be about 3 weeks. Still, it will be annoying, and it's something that you can kind of look at right now. You don't need to hoard it all, but again, you might want to go out and get some right now.
No, I absolutely agree. The problem is, what I worry about is people are going to go to that extreme panic. I've heard it now on regular radio, mainstream radio and TV, that there may be meat shortages. So I'm actually shocked when I go to the store and I don't see empty shelves, because I'm really surprised at how the American people are so unprepared.
Yes.
I guess it's the people in the West in general, other than,
it'd be the West
countries.
Yeah, it would be Canada as well. Probably even Europe for that matter. I mean, I think we've just got so used to a consuming mindset, right? Using credit cards, debt-based. I mean, horrifying figures are coming out as far as the average American family, what they have in savings. I mean, this is going to change everything moving forward. I've always mentioned that what we're going through is still going to change the psyche and the mindset of people moving forward. I think people are going to start saving for a rainy day.
Oh, yeah, and I think, I'm not positive with the figure, but I think it was 90% of the people can't come up with $500 or more than $500 in an emergency.
Wow. Yeah,
in the United States, and that was before all this happened.
yeah, that's striking. I mean, they mentioned, in the Great Depression, but that's exactly what people did. They actually started, saving, right? And something like this, people never thought would happen. It's going to create this idea of saying, hey, in case anything happens in the future, it could be anything. Let's have some money for a rainy day. Sometimes it does rain.
Exactly, and I hope enough people get that point, because we have been so conditioned in the West to spend, because we are a consumer-driven economy. Most of our GDP, 70% or even more now, is just consumer-based spending. And the signal I'm sure they're going to give is, they haven't done it yet, but I'm knowing how the government works. They're going to be like, you need to go out and spend money at these restaurants. You got to buy goods at Home Depot, and you have to go to the movie theaters. They're going to be encouraging people to go out and spend this money.
Yes.
So I think in the short term, you're going to get maybe too much money chasing too few goods. And that's a little recipe for a little spike in inflation. We're seeing that right now. Like a gallon of distilled water, because I buy distilled water, is usually somewhere between 80 and 99 cents. At an expensive store, $1.29. Well, I'm seeing stores charge over $2 for it now.
Yes.
Because there's too many people chasing it, and not enough of the water, because people are hoarding it.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example of how that works. And,
yeah, I tell people, even when it comes to food, I'm like, look at it as an investment. It's going to be going up in price. Maybe significantly so in the next few years. But even the very fact that it's going to go up in price, it makes sense to buy it, for, an investment. It's a good investment because it's just going to get more expensive, right? That whole idea of prepping, and just, you don't have to be a freak about it. I always tell people, like, look, you don't have to be crazy about it, but it's peace of mind knowing that you're okay, and that, you're going to be fine over a period of a few months, no matter what happens in this world.
Exactly. And the people need to get their mindset straight. The number one priority should not be toilet paper.
Yeah. I'm still puzzled on that one. Remember we talked about that? We still haven't figured that one out. You think it'd be water, or you think it'd be canned goods, or you think toilet paper. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you have to think outside the box. I mean, I was so convinced that people wouldn't go for that, and it was on my list, actually, to shop in a couple of days for it. And I didn't think that they would go there. Yeah, in the Northeast, I can tell you from living there, snowstorms, you could tell if a snowstorm was coming in Baltimore, because toilet paper would be low on the shelves or gone.
Yeah.
You didn't even have to listen to the weather. Oh, a snowstorm's coming.
Yeah.
And they lasted, till the storm was over, and then, they replenished. But this thing with toilet paper has continued.
It has.
Now for almost a month. It just amazes me. Now, there was a period where people kind of woke up. It happened about 2 weeks in after the toilet paper shortage. Mm-hmm. I went to the store, and I swear 70% of the shelves that I was looking at were empty, or close to empty. And almost all the meat was gone. There was no lunch meats. There were no hot dogs, nothing like that. Most of the protein products were gone. But it took people 2 weeks to figure that out. That's scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And again, we'll talk a little bit more in the show about just the very fact of relying too much on other countries. I think that is about to change as well. I'm seeing a transition happen, moving away from globalization, more back to localization. But we'll talk more about that, because I think it's interesting, the developments that are going to happen, in the world. You and I are very, very similar on our outlook. As far as like everyone sitting here, in the world, and looking at the fact that this coronavirus, once this thing is all dealt with, we're going to get a V-shaped recovery, and everything's going to be back to normal, because obviously the economy was amazing. It was great. It never had been better. I mean, Trump was riding on the fact that it had never been better. It was the greatest economy in the world. So therefore, you've got kind of this pit stop where all of a sudden everything kind of halts. And once we get this all tackled, everything's going to go back to the way it was, probably even better. What do you say to those type of remarks?
Well, this is where I'm going to get accused of being a fearmonger.
It's all good. It's all good. I'm with you.
Yeah. And I'm not. I don't emotionally attach myself to it. I'm a trader, and you learn to, when you're talking about anything economics, take your emotions out of it. I don't care if it goes up or down. I just want to look at it objectively and try to guess,
Sure.
Try to predict, to help myself and help my family and others if I can. And that's really, to finish the first topic, how I got into doing YouTube. And I had my own financial crisis, and because I prepped, I made it through 3 years of no income.
Oh, wow.
So you never know, because people say, well, it's always, people suffer from the normalcy bias.
Correct.
The way it's been in our lifetime is the way it's always going to be.
Correct.
And the only generation I know of that didn't adhere to that was like my grandmother's generation, who went through the Great Depression. To the day she died, she tracked every penny that somebody owed her or she owed them in a book. And she was a miser with everything. And she wasn't a prepper because she didn't have that knowledge really to do it. That was probably more my grandfather, but when he passed away, that was pretty much gone. But she saved money.
Correct.
Religiously.
Mm-hmm.
She actually lived in a house that was paid off, and with everything, she was probably paying $400 a month to live.
Wow.
And she was getting, I don't know, $1,200 to $1,600 from a pension from my grandfather and from Social Security. And other than that $400, and let's say $400 extra in food or whatever else, every single dime of that went into the bank.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so
that's smart.
Yeah.
It's just smart. It's not being like a hardcore prepper. It's just being smart.
Yeah. And she lived to be 93, and she never touched that money. Think about it. You would think at some point you'd be like, all right, I'm 88. I've had a stroke.
Yeah.
Why don't I just spend it, go on a nice little trip, whatever? No, that was the mentality. But that generation is it.
Correct.
And that generation did not really pass it on to us.
Correct.
And they couldn't really, because we didn't go through it.
Yeah, we were, this is just foreign to us, this whole idea of just not having things in the store, or just, I mean, unemployment levels like this. So the whole idea of a depression, that big scary word that no one likes to talk about, really all that is just longer than a recession. A recession is 2 quarters of down, consecutively. Well, I mean, if you look at, I mean, they labeled what happened in 2008 as the Great Recession. They didn't quite call it the Great, Depression. But we know that the recovery after that was never really there. I mean, it was suffering even in 2019. There was a lot of economists warning, things weren't looking good. I mean, you can actually look back right now. I was just looking at an article tonight, April of 2019, and they're saying the whole world is moving towards a, Great Recession, depression type scenario. They were already warning about that based on the debt to GDP, ratio they're seeing, and just the level of debt, even personal, when it comes to household incomes.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about this when we talked. What they did in 2008, 2009 was they blew up a bubble again. Except this time it wasn't just in the housing market, which caused the last bubble, and the banks. This time they blew everything up, and they had to. That's what saved us from a depression. A depression is the prices go way down.
Correct.
As I said, nobody spends money, and so then you have too much goods chasing too few dollars. So people keep lowering prices, and we'll see it first in the most we've already seen it in the most overinflated. Yeah, oil. Well, oil wasn't actually overinflated. That's a little bit different story. Yeah. But the stock market.
Sure.
I mean, look how fast that went from about 29,000 down to 19,000 or 18,000.
It's looking good though now. It's starting to move up now.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's called a wave 2.
Yeah, and we'll get into that because I think a lot of people are looking at that, and it's like that false sense of security. It's almost like peace and safety, and people think, well, we're through the worst of it, And here's the question for you: they were able to push this, a decade based on the money printing. So what about now? I mean, they're printing even more now, so of course they're going to save everything now. I mean, they're printing trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, not just to every sector of the economy, but also to households. To individuals. This is something new, even though it's just the scraps. I mean, everyone else is getting the millions and billions, and the people are getting $1,200. What do you say to that?
The difference is in 2009, although we were close, it wasn't beyond the point of no return as far as mathematically. Although we were very, very close, right on the edge. Now it is so exponentially beyond recovery that it's almost like when you talk about war, everybody, like in World War II, the French were still thinking about a defensive trench warfare against the Germans. And we'll see how that turned out. They always talk about the generals fight the last war. Well, if we fight the last economic crisis like this one, it's different this time. And this time, people are thrown out of work first, really. It's up front, where that happened on the backside last time. We had the financial institutions go down because of bad mortgages and things like that. The housing bubble is really what that was. But now we have another housing bubble. It's not as bad, but it's a bubble. So we have a real estate bubble. We have a stock bubble. We have a banking bubble. We have a sovereign debt bubble. And not only sovereign like states, the states are now already talking about filing bankruptcy and
Correct.
getting bailouts from the federal government. Well, the federal government is actually insolvent as well.
Yeah, that's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand. They're like, this is great, like they're getting all this money, but where's this money coming from? They're broke.
Yes, well, as we've already talked about, it's just you're printed in the thin air, but it's still a debt. Every dollar that we are issuing, like these $1 trillion stimulus programs, we're on, I think, number 4 already, or we're working up to number 4. We had 3.
Correct.
Number 4 is supposed to be the
Infrastructure one? Or...
Infrastructure,
Yep.
yeah, for
Yep.
2 trillion is what they're talking about, which means it'll be closer to 3.
Correct. Well, the
And-
Democrats will get in and they want all this green stuff, right, to help the
Exactly.
environment. So they'll jack it up.
Exactly. It might even be over 3 trillion. What's the difference? Who cares right now?
Well, who cares? That's my point. My point is, like, right now, who cares? Why not just do 50 trillion and just pour money to everyone? I mean, might as well get it done with. It doesn't matter anymore. They said they're going to do to infinity. I mean, that's their words, not mine.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
unlimited. It's unlimited, they said now.
Yep, we will. Paraphrasing the Fed, we will do whatever it takes. We will print whatever is needed.
So explain in layman terms for people what that's doing to their dollars sitting in their bank account or in their wallet right now. What exactly happens? Because a lot of people don't really realize that there's a hidden tax that nobody even is aware of, and it's called inflation.
Yes, exactly. And this time it will be price inflation because they need to bail out Main Street. They didn't need to bail it out in 2009. That's a major difference.
Yes.
Me, you, our children, and now what is it? It's 24 million people, 26 million people have just lost their livelihood in the last month.
I believe 26 it's at right now. I just looked it up before the show. Yeah, 24 or
somewhere in
26.
Yeah, and this I think it's the 8th of May, so about 2 weeks from now we get what's called the non-farm payrolls report, and that will give us the unemployment rate and a bunch of other figures. And if it hasn't already started by then, the stock market will have already headed back down. We'll talk about that too, the cycles. But since they have to bail out Main Street, this is where the inflation, the money printing inflation, hits Main Street because we're getting bailed out. So it depends on how much they bail us out directly. If they keep doing these stimulus checks, which I think they probably will if they do one more after this. If they keep doing that, then you're going to have all these people now having all this money that they're going to see as free money. And they're just going to spend like crazy. And then you're going to start really getting price inflation. We're getting price inflation anyway, but they keep manipulating the numbers. Actually, the main reason they manipulate the inflationary numbers down, are you ready for this? Is so they don't have to pay their biggest liability more, which is Social Security recipients, because they have a cost of living adjustment based on inflation. So they've been saying inflation is running at 0 to 2% for the last 10 years.
Which is a lie. We know that. But
Oh,
yes.
that's a big lie.
Yes.
It's running 0 to 2%. It's running 2% every 6 months, if not earlier. I mean, and they play little tricks, like a quart of or a half gallon of ice cream or a container. Let's just call it a container of ice cream. Might cost $4.99, and 6 months from now it's still $4.99, but the packaging is a little bit
Correct. Yeah, I know. They do that with everything. I mean, look at ketchup. I mean, if you actually, they'll indent it. They'll have it like concaved at the bottom. But they do all these different methods to make it look like there's no inflation. But they start taking more and more of that product out at the same price, or even raising the price a little bit. And everyone has this idea that it's like, well, stuff just goes up over time. Well, if that were the case, why are TVs and wants going down, but yet needs are going up? It's that big illusion that a lot of people don't understand. It's like, no, things should not just go up in price all the time. That's a lie. Things actually should go down. If you're providing a good product, usually the idea is to get it as cheap and as good as possible for the public. And usually if you have a very expensive product, you're not going to sell very many. But if you can get it cheaper, you're going to get that many more sold. So this whole idea that it's this price, prices go up over time. Well, I'm sure you remember really well, Richard, in 20 years ago, nice brand new, HD television was like 10 grand, maybe 20 grand, right? And I mean, it's gone down now. You can get like an HD television for $300. for like a 40-inch or a 50-inch. I mean, it's gone down substantially. So this whole idea that things always go up in price, but notice that it's always utilities, food. These are the things that are necessity, stuff that we need.
Absolutely. And they do another thing, this might not be the right term, they do replacement. So they'll throw in a basket, like what a family of four might buy at the grocery store. And they'll have like 3 ribeye steaks and just everything they need for the house. Well, when that ribeye steak starts really going up in price, what the government says is, well, the people won't pay that much for it, so we'll substitute a lower grade of steak. And they do. They'll put like chuck steak. And then once that's too expensive, they're like, and that would skew their numbers higher, so they have to pay out more in Social Security and other things that are tied to COLA, cost of living allowance. They'll say, okay, now they'll change that out to hot dogs, something cheaper. Mm-hmm. And then they just change the basket, and so that it just fools the people.
Yeah, it just fools them. And I think this is the biggest thing is they see, I mean, I've talked to a lot of different people that are incredibly realistic, conservative, even optimistic. And everyone is looking at like the writing is on the wall with this one, over the next 2 to 3 years, we're headed towards some very vicious times when it comes to the economy. And we can maybe talk a little bit more about, what do you see as far as the economic superpower status of the United States over the next 10 years?
That's pretty complex. First of all, people are going to rush into the dollar because it's still, even with all the printing, it's the one that most people around the world have the most confidence in. Mm-hmm. So that'll happen at first. This is what happened in 2009. And this is why precious metals at first really dropped, even though the Fed was printing.
Correct.
People could not figure out why it was. Well, if you study the history of it, gold eventually reacts to all that money printing. If they're fighting deflation, which they were then and they are now.
Yeah.
That's when gold and silver really will take off, but there's a lag with that.
Well, gold's bad in deflation. It's incredibly good in inflation.
Well, it's bad in deflation, but it's fantastic. It's actually better than inflation when they are fighting deflation.
I see.
So that's why he hit all-time highs in 2011, because of all that Ben Bernanke fighting the depression of the 1930s, all that helicopter money.
Correct.
But the reason why there's a lag is because as asset prices go down, as the rich have to cover their losses or cover their margin calls, what they have to do is they sell things that they don't see as performing well, which gold and silver weren't or aren't right now. Mm-hmm. So they sell their gold and silver positions. And gold and silver is minute as far as the size of the marketplace. So if you get 80% of these investors, these big investors, hedge funds and different things like that, selling their gold and silver positions so they don't get margin calls for their clients on other things that they're putting in their hedge funds, this is why gold and silver sell off, and I think we're going to have a big sell-off in gold and silver now.
Yes.
It could go the other way, and I can explain why there's still a possibility we could just shoot for the moon real soon, but that would be a bad sign if it happens that quickly. Mm-hmm. You
mean a bad sign that basically the demise is sooner? Or what do you mean by a bad sign if all of a sudden the precious metals, start taking off as far as becoming very bullish?
If they start becoming very bullish right now.
Yeah, like say they go over 2,000. Say gold goes over 2,000 by the end of June.
That means that inflation is already here.
Gotcha.
And the hyperinflationary cycle is just that much sooner.
Gotcha. Okay, so basically you're saying it buys you a little bit of time. If you do see a crash, you see a massive pullback in the precious metals, then there's more time. The good news here is, and I think that's what we're trying to do on the show, and that's what I've been trying to do for people, is say the good news here is there's still time to prepare, get things ready, right? To preserve your purchasing power, to kind of protect your dinner table. These type of things are important, and what we've seen is not exactly at all close to how bad the things that are coming. And I'm not doom and gloom. I'm just looking at the realistic expectations of what happens when you get to a level of what, all the governments of the world, not just the U.S., and this is the thing here that's different. Never, ever has there been a time where every single country of the world have been drunk by printing money. This has never
Yeah,
happened to this
absolutely.
extent. So this is why when we're talking, we're not just coming down on America, even though America falls into it because it's the world reserve currency. What we're saying is we're looking at a worldwide economic depression like the world has never seen that's coming up. But there still is time. I mean, I always say, be ready. Don't just sit back and say, oh, I've got, 4 or 5 years. I don't even think you have that long. But what I'm saying is, Rich and I believe both of us are on the same line of thinking that it won't happen this year. Are you still that way, Rich, as far as, when the big crash comes?
Yes, we're going to have another downturn in the markets, the stock markets, which everybody unfortunately connects to the real economy. It's not. That's going to happen real soon, like maybe next week. The cycle is due for a larger downdraw than what we've had already.
So are you talking like the Dow, the NASDAQ? Like, are you talking overall
Yes.
just the market? So you're going to see a big kind of crisis happen here in the next few weeks as far as the stock market.
Right. We'll be below the lows we were at several weeks ago when we went down in the upper teens. We'll probably go to the mid-teens, maybe even the low teens.
Okay.
But then we're going to have this quote-unquote V-shaped recovery that's going to actually feel like it.
Correct.
And that's going to last for a while. And later when we talk about cycles or Elliott waves, it's always psychology that draws these cycles. Everybody's will finally start to get back to quote-unquote normal, although it never will be again, I don't think, because of the economy.
Correct.
And that's going to last probably through to early, my guess. It's just timing is rough with this because it is new. It isn't, history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat exactly. I'm thinking early next year, we start to have the real slam down in the stock markets. And that's when unemployment will go exponential, because that's when companies will really have to really lay off people. And that's saying a lot because people are really getting laid off right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of that happening right now. I mean, I've explained before that even when the green light, everyone can go back. The question is things just going to rebound? I mean, how long is it going to take for people to travel again? What about these restaurants? I mean, how many restaurants are going to be completely decimated and closed forever after this, right? Like, there's so many jobs that are never coming back. They're gone forever.
Right. And they have this PPP, they're calling it payroll protection plan, where they're giving small businesses, and I don't think it's a bad thing. They're giving small businesses money to keep people on the payroll until they can reopen. And a lot of those people will stay on the payroll because of that. Well, I don't know how long that money is going to last, but at some point that's going to run out and they'll stop renewing it. And that's probably just at the point where we're talking about next January, February, where these people that were able to keep their jobs because of that and other things, people are going to realize, no, it isn't going ever, like you're talking about restaurant owners, airlines, they're going to realize it's never going to be back. Hotels, we talked about sports and how that's affected.
Yes.
And just, one baseball game that's missed is an immense dent to a local economy.
It's massive. And they're already talking about, resuming it with no stadiums, just the players playing. And we talked about it before, but like, how exactly are these athletes going to be paid? And let me say this on the onset. If there is ever a bailout for these $1 million salaries, I hope people riot worse than they're rioting now. I mean, if they start getting bailouts, the sport industry, because they want their, $4 or $5 million salaries, like, I think that's time for people to go crazy. I don't think it will happen, but my point is they're going to have to take a pay cut. Just even with the advertising that will resume on television, it still won't be to the levels it was prior to, the entire lockdown.
Yeah, they get millions of dollars with each game that has 20,000 people in the stands.
Yeah,
and the average person spends about $80 to $100 when they go to a baseball game.
Yeah, and like I don't see that happening at all. I don't even see stadiums happening at all this year. I've told people many times. I mean, it will resume at some point, but I just don't see it happening this year. I see sports resuming, but I don't see stadiums being filled with people happening this year. Maybe it will happen, but not in my country. It won't. So I guess we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, that's the whole point, is the economy itself. And we'll talk a little bit about this. We kind of move into the whole political type of thing. But so do you think that they're going to basically pump so much money? They're probably going to have another scare that's coming out, kind of like the oil thing came out of nowhere, right? Just, everyone started, freaking out. So they're going to have to do probably a bailout of the energy sector and stuff. So there'll probably be another scare coming up here in the next few weeks to a month or so, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've got to do another emergency, part 5, let's dump, 3 trillion or 4 trillion or whatever it is. At that point, do you believe there's going to be an appearance that things are moving up going towards the election? Do you think that things are going to collapse before the election, or there's going to be an appearance that things are looking good leading into November?
Yeah, my best guess is things are going to be looking like they're improving. I'm not sure they're going to look like they're good, but I think the need for these bailouts, which are coming about every other day now, they're talking about the next one. The frequency of those will diminish. They'll still happen, but it might be, all right, we went a month without having to bail anybody out, but now we're looking at this industry and maybe we need to, it'll be that type of thing. And if we can just get them bailed out, I think we're there. That's what they'll be telling people.
Sure.
And I think that's what will give the false impression that we're on our way back. And that'll last, like I said, I think until early next year, very late this year at the earliest, I think. And a lot of people always say they're not going to let the economy crash if it's an election coming up. Well, I've never believed that. You don't have that much control over an economy to keep it from crashing or not.
That is true. As far as the crashing, I agree with you there. I do think, though, that the other side are going to try everything in their power to make sure that the economy is not looking good, because that's the only thing that they fear the most, is a very strong economy. I mean, you can see it in their faces, you can see it in their speeches, and they know for a fact that if the economy is absolutely miserable, even though I am definitely wanting, Trump over a Biden, and we'll talk a little bit more about, if even Biden's going to be the one. But when it comes down to it, I think that that's something that they definitely fear a lot. But, not being able to control the economy, I totally agree with you. I just think that, you start injecting so much money into it, you can give the appearance for a while that things are looking good. Even though it went down the stock market at first when they injected that money in, it still started tracking upwards afterwards, So you start going crazy and say, let's just go crazy. Let's do a 10 trillion emergency, for the economy or whatever. I'm sure that will last for a bit. Don't underestimate. That's one thing I learned in 2008. Don't underestimate how long they can kick the can down the road. I don't think they have much longer, but we were all surprised to learn how far they were able to do it based in 2008.
Yes, and they'll be able to do it for a little bit this time. But there's a hole in the, let's use the analogy of a bike. You're riding a bike, you got a hole in your tire, and you don't put a patch on it. You just put the pump on, and you keep pumping and pumping. You got air in it, but
Correct.
It's leaking out just as fast almost as you're putting it in.
Good analogy. Yeah, that's a great way, because that's exactly what it is. And I tell people all the time that the coronavirus was the pin. I mean, it could have been anything, but once these bubbles were burst, that was it. I mean, it so happened to be it. A lot of people are thinking it's the black swan. It's the thing that's affecting the economy, but it's just the pin. I mean, it could have been anything, and a lot of people couldn't have seen that coming. A lot of the economists that I've listened to say, look, none of us could have called this thing. But again, it's the pin that popped it. And now, like you said, they're aggressively pumping air into a tire that's already been popped.
Exactly. And to me, there was 2 black swans. The oil crisis that happened just before the coronavirus thing got all the news.
Which, let's talk a little bit about that. Don't you think that's interesting, especially with the timing, just with the fact of those 2 countries doing what they did, and then even afterwards, the aggressiveness on turning the taps on too high. Like, I mean, you could say one thing that they're trying to do damage to America, or they're trying to do something, but it's really hurting the Russian economy. I mean, to me, it seems like the stupidest thing for Russia to do, because pretty much their entire economy depends on oil, not like China, where they have so much exports, right? Russia doesn't.
Right. Well, it was actually Saudi Arabia and OPEC and the other nations that they had their little mini oil war with Russia. And
That's
Russia, Russia's number one export is oil. It's
correct.
They are they're an oil economy, almost as dependent on oil for their economy as Saudi Arabia is. So Saudi Arabia, because they don't have as much, let's call it debt or obligations, it's a much smaller country, they figured they could drive out their new enemy, Russia, not an enemy as if they're going to go to physical war, although that's always a possibility. Mm-hmm. but they decided they were going to drive Russia out of the oil business, and then they have less competition. See, Saudi Arabia now has the United States as competition. They've got Canada as competition. They've got Russia as competition. That's a long cry from where we were in the mid-1970s when they caused gas shortages and the price to spike and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. That's very true. It's a lot different now. I was talking more about what happened just recently when Saudi Arabia and Russia aggressively together, turned on the taps, full steam, right?
Oh, yeah, that was, it's almost like it was insane.
It really was. I mean, it's really insane to think. I mean, if they're, playing this like who's better and who can be on the top. I mean, they're being really competitive, but it just seems really silly based on the surrounding situation, what they would do to their own economy, because now we're in the mess where they can't find any room for all this oil.
That's right. There's worldwide glut of oil. There's tankers sitting off the coast of many countries just sitting there.
Yep.
With no orders to deliver it anywhere because nobody needs it.
Yeah, which is incredible. Like I said, anyone that was looking in the energy sector or oil never in a million years could have predicted, a barrel going to minus $40 a barrel. I mean, they were literally paying people to take it.
Right. And that's part of the stupidity of paper contracts where you have to take delivery. That's the way they do it in the United States. If you can't get out of your short position, you have to settle that contract on what's called the expiration date of the contract. So all these people were stuck with contracts, or going to be stuck with contracts. So they were actually paying to get out of it. So they didn't have to take delivery because they couldn't store it anywhere.
So do you think, let's just go to oil real quick. Do you think that industry is in big trouble based on indicators you're seeing? And just, a lot of people see these news and they're like, oh, it's up the next day. Everything's fine. It went to minus, $37 a barrel. It looks like it's going up again. No big deal. But like behind the scenes, what do you see going on? Because I see a massive disaster coming in the energy sector.
It's already here.
It is.
It was almost a disaster. Well, it was a disaster when oil was 60, at least in the West, because we get a lot of oil from sands and fracking. Well, we get natural gas from fracking. We have expensive methods of extraction compared to Saudi Arabia, who doesn't. Their oil, my understanding, someone sent me something where it says it cost them $2 to get a barrel out of the ground. Well, it cost our companies, they were underwater at 60.
Correct. It's the same thing in my province in Canada. I mean, we're a huge oil reservoir for the world, and I mean, anytime oil goes below $60, I mean, it decimates our society, our economy. It's brutal. So, like in Canada, and specifically Alberta, where I'm from, I'm kind of like the Texas of people compare Alberta to Texas in America. It's looking very, very grim based on just where oil is and what we're seeing happening here in the future.
Yeah, and it's very simple. You can use another analogy. If you have a store where you sell nothing but refrigerators and freezers, let's just say refrigerators, and all of a sudden the refrigerators they cost you to buy them, let's say $500, and you've been selling them at $800, so you're okay. Now all of a sudden there's a glut of refrigerators on the market and the price has gone down to $200. How long are you going to be able to stay in business selling that refrigerator for $500?
Yeah,
which
correct.
Is your all-in cost.
Yeah, and that's
right. So what will happen is this is actually supply and demand correcting an industry. I mean, think about it. OPEC had a monopoly in the 1970s on oil. Now everybody in the world is pumping oil.
correct.
Mexico is a big exporter of oil, and it just keeps going on and on. Now Venezuela, even though they have other problems, there's the thing too. That's a good case in point. Venezuela should be one of the richest nations in the world, but they printed so much of their money that they're the disaster area of the world. Everybody talks about it. They're the Weimar Republic of our day.
Correct. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more for that. We'll go into a history lesson, maybe an hour or two, and let people know exactly what happened when countries did this reckless money printing that's going on where they inflate their currency, and it really devalues the purchasing power of everyone's dollar, where stuff goes really crazy as far as pricing is concerned. I mean, some of the stories you hear in the Weimar Republic, you brought up Venezuela, you get into like Germany, you get into Argentina, all these different countries, it doesn't end well at all.
No, and the way the central bank is set up, every dollar they're printing is debt. And I just keep going back to that. So that means the taxpayer is going to have to pay it the way the current system is. Now, the current system will not last. It cannot long-term last. You have to totally, I used the analogy on my live stream yesterday, that if you want to build a new house on your property and you already have a house, you have to demolish the old one before you can come up with something brand new. And we're going to end up with a brand new world system, probably, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to end up with something new all over the world.
Correct.
Because there's too much of a hole in the bubble, as we were talking about the bike tire. You can't blow it up anymore.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about different scenarios and what you see. I mean, some people will talk about going back to a gold standard. Some people will look at like a basket of currencies together, but I think even the very fact that they move to a digital type scenario, it still needs to be backed by something that's true and real, that the world says, yes. And again, they're going to want that, honest accounting in place that people can't start manipulating like they did over the last, I guess you'd say, almost 90 years. I mean, we're talking about cycles. We're seriously at a 90-year cycle right now based on the Great Depression.
Yeah, and also at a war cycle.
Okay, and we'll get into that war cycle because I think that's interesting. We were going to talk about that as well, about, could a lot of the things that we're seeing unfold lead to, possibly World War III. I mean, a lot of people have been scared about, even saying World War III. But again, I would say right now we're in Cold War with China, and a lot of these things spill over. I'm watching a lot of articles and news, and again, there's a lot of rhetoric and tension building up against China, and I think a lot of finger pointing. China definitely is not going to come out of this looking very good. Any which way you spin it, and wherever you are on the coronavirus, the virus. All I'm saying is there's a lot of shenanigans going on in China. I mean, a lot of countries are recognizing this. Even in Canada, they're starting to be suspicious. Lawsuits. I don't know if you've seen all the lawsuits that are coming out now of different states suing China. Because of the stuff that they held, that they were destroying evidence, they weren't allowing people, to come in. I mean, I think the world, at the very least, is going to say we want an independent investigation, and China's going to basically give them the finger and say, no way. China's not going to allow this. I mean, the Communist Chinese Party, is not at all about this. They're about keeping the ranks and about keeping the appearance. To them, it was considered weakness. I mean, I remember at the beginning with Russia, before this got really crazy, they were like, this is just a flu and we're Russia and we're not going to be scared and cower. Well, it was only a few weeks later that all of a sudden Putin's telling everyone, I have a friend in Russia, in Moscow, and she's telling me that he gave them like 3 days notice to go out and get groceries, and if they came out after that, they would either be fined or they'd go to prison. And the fine was $26,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and they would be tracked on their phones and all. Again, it was severe. But the crazy thing was, if you look at the way Putin was beforehand, he was like, no big deal. We're Russia. You know what I mean? It was just interesting how he changed course so quickly, and then ordered everyone in their homes. But I think Russia is going to have some serious problems coming up, just economically, with the oil, just with their economy. And again, this is the times when you see people go to war. When people get backed into a corner, it gets very scary. I mean, what would you say about that?
Yes, and just something you brought up, I've been thinking about. You mentioned that being tracked by the phone. Yep. I think this whole thing might end up changing our habits where we don't take our phones everywhere anymore because they will be tracking us, possibly.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't want to be tracked. I think most people do not want to be tracked.
Correct.
So we're going to see changes, I think, in habits, and I think we're on the very early stages, if they don't fix things here, of another revolutionary war here to overthrow the governments we have. Yep. We've got some state governments here that are unbelievably tyrannical through this whole thing. Correct. And even the states that aren't, my state isn't tyrannical with it. They came up with all the guidelines and they said, restaurants shouldn't be open and this and that. So everybody's shut down like everywhere else. But if you go out and you congregate and they see you, the police are not allowed to enforce it. Yes. So that's one good thing. But we have the wimpiest governor, not the wimpiest, but one of the wimpiest governors in the whole state.
Yeah, don't you find it interesting though that it has been left up to the governors? And I agree with you. There's a lot of overreach, and there's definitely cause for protests to happen when they're trying to take away freedom and liberty. But don't you find it interesting through this whole scenario that really Trump overall has been very respectful to the Constitution and allowed the states to deal with it. I mean, I have not yet seen a federal mandate by law for all of the states of the United States of America. I have not seen that.
Yeah, no, and I don't think there will be.
I don't think there will be.
In fact, he was very smart with it. In fact, he kind of hinted a couple of days before that. He said, if I came out and said this, You'd be against it just because I said it.
Yep. Trump, they'll do the opposite. Trump could like do it as a test, and he could say, I want to lock down the whole country and keep everyone in their doors. Then people would lose their mind. But vice versa, it doesn't matter what he would say, right? If he had actually said, let's let everyone stay in for another month, all the Democrats would turn around instead of saying no, we need to be safe. They'd be like, no, let us work. You know what I mean? Let us out of our homes. Like they will do just the opposite. It's just we're so polarized. Like I don't think America has ever been this polarized. I've ever seen it this polarized ever in my lifetime. I don't know about you, but this is unbelievable polarization that's taking place.
Yeah, just when you think it's the worst, it keeps getting worse. But what he did was, he came out and said, because they were like, one of the reporters on the left asked, "What are you going to do if one of the governors says they're not going to go by your guidelines or whatever?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I have absolute authority."
I remember that.
And I was like, "Oh, he's playing him so well. He's playing him like a little fiddle."
Yep.
And sure enough, everybody, all the left-leaning reporters,
losing their mind.
I know. The Constitution says states have rights, and it was like 3 or 4 people yelling about it. What about the states? They have rights. It was like brilliant.
Yep.
So then the next day, he was like, "It's up to the governors."
Yep. I know.
We'll back him.
He totally played them. He totally played them because it was so quick.
Well.
He played them absolutely. You could just, at first I'm like, oh, okay, wow, he's putting his foot down. But instantly, like very next day or 2 days later, he's like, no, it's up to them. And he totally caught them in this trap, right? Because
so
they
now
were
they
all,
can't come out
they can't
say anything.
I know.
Right.
Yeah.
Because before then, they kept crying that the federal government needed to mandate locking down the whole country.
Correct.
They were constantly on that federal government thing, and then he switched them on a dime.
I know he did. It was really funny because it was like that's exactly you think of what they want to hear, and then they start losing their mind and getting all constitutionalist. Like, no, we need to protect the Constitution. They're never talking about the Constitution. They always want to rip it apart, and then they're like, "What about the Constitution?" And I just laughed when he turned it around on them. But no, it's been amazing just watching that all take place. But I tell people, regardless, and again, I'm definitely more pro-Trump than I was Hillary. I always tell people of the two choices. What I'm saying is when it comes down to it, right now in America, you either have socialism or you have communism. Take your choice. But again, make no mistake, when it comes to the economics, you're now entering socialism. So, a lot of people will say what they want, but again, Trump, by doing all these things, money printing and stuff, he's, perpetually continuing on exactly what they've been doing for so long. And again, it's a maybe socialism light, and it's not communism, but I'll tell you, communism's waiting in the wings, and I'll tell you, it's going to be a horror show if all of a sudden the Democrats get in the next election. But we'll talk more about that in hour 2. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio. This is hour 1 with my guest, Richard Hopkins, Mr. Thrive and Survive. Check him out on YouTube. We'll be back right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hello, Karl Marx here. Look at my wonderful hair. Notice how I sweep it back. Karl? I call it the 360 sweep. Beard, sideburns, and the magnificent coif.
Carl!
What? What is this?
You're on the radio. They can't see you.
Oh, yeah, I get confused.
Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.B. Bork, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back to Celebrate Truth Radio. This is hour two. I got my guest, Richard Hopkins from Mr. Thrive and Survive on tonight. We've been talking about all sorts of awesome topics. We're getting into a lot more here in hour two, so don't go anywhere. And we'll see how we're feeling about doing an after show on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube /Celebrate Truth, check it out later. We might do an after show. We'll see how things go there. But anyways, let's get right back to it. Rich, as far as what we were talking about, do you see, I personally see a move towards localization. I see the whole idea. A lot of people are talking about, oh, the New World Order, and they're going to be doing all this stuff through it. I see the opposite. I see almost like a Tower of Babel 2.0 happening, where everyone is getting all thrown apart, confused, and fighting with one another. And, you know, these type of things lead to war. Do you see more globalization happening here in the future, or do you see less?
I see less at first. And what we were talking about before, which you brought up about the possibility of World War III, I don't see World War III. I see regional wars.
Okay.
And a lot of them. Maybe, you know, the world is at war again, but it's not like it was before, where there's two theaters of operation, Europe and the Pacific, with three countries, three Axis powers, you know, Japan, Italy, well, four, I guess, Japan, Italy, Germany, and Japan, Italy, Germany. Who am I missing on their side? I guess it was three against the rest of the world. This I see like maybe, and I'm just throwing these countries at this, might not be right. The Middle East, like Iran against Syria, against Yemen, against maybe Turkey and Saudi Arabia, that type of deal, with Russia maybe involved in that, maybe on the cold side. And then you have, in our case, like you talked about, China and the United States, we're definitely, like you said, in a Cold War. And if anybody deserves to be called on their, let's use a kind word, shenanigans, it's China. They are as corrupt and evil a people as can be, in every sense of the word. And I think we talked about this. They're really the only communist
Remember, I'm going to make a disclaimer. Remember, we're talking about the Communist Party, not Chinese people.
Yeah,
I know some people freak out.
Good.
Yeah, of course. We're talking about the parties, just the government. So just in case somebody starts going crazy because they hear we're talking bad about Chinese, I just usually make that disclaimer because sometimes people can't differentiate.
No, I get it. Yeah. No, the Chinese people are awesome people. It's they're head of their government, and they'll tell you the same thing if they could.
Yes.
That they're oppressed, they hate their government, and they know. People always know how their government is.
Man, they boarded people. I don't know if you've seen the video footage and stuff, but they literally boarded people in their homes. They couldn't even leave, right? There was some horrifying video footage that surfaced. We won't get into that in this show, but trust me, most of the citizens are fearful of the government, you know? A lot of fear kind of runs through a lot of the population. But yeah, I mean, they again have, had this appearance to the world, trying to come off as the savior and helping out and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes where they are doing a lot of really bad stuff. And again, what do you expect from communism? I mean, when has communism ever turned out well in the history of the world?
Yeah, and I guess there's 0 cases.
Zero. And that's the thing. What people say, it's just like, how in the world is it going to be different? I mean, it's like this every single time, and China's no different. But continue on.
Yeah, and the same thing is true for socialism for any country that has any complexity to it. Of course, everybody, like you said, everybody in the West now has some aspects of socialism, which is dangerous.
Yes.
But people will always say, well, look at Sweden. Yeah, well, look at the population of Sweden. And when you really understand Sweden, it's a lot more capitalistic than you
think. There's like 10 million. There's like 10 million in Sweden, apparently, around there.
Right. Versus 330 million here.
Correct.
So it's a big difference. We're a lot more complex. And as I was going to say, Sweden is actually a lot more capitalist than people think. Yeah, they have national health care. You guys have national health care.
We do. Mm-hmm.
And you can do certain aspects with large countries. But if you have a Bernie Sanders, whether they want to go all in, that's when you get the Venezuela. Mm-hmm. That's when you get the meltdown. That's when the currency goes to nothing. And, you got people all over the left here saying everybody needs what they call a living wage. Well, it sounds fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll take my free $1,200. I'm not going to decline it if everybody else is going to get it. And
again, it's theft, though. Again, it's theft, right? You're stealing from somebody to give to another.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before, I thought it was really interesting. You said if they do one more kind of stimulus to the people, like $2,000 a month or whatever, you don't think it's going away. Maybe you think that a universal income is approaching very quickly.
Yeah, and I think what it is that the people on the inside know how bad it really is. We know, we're talking about how bad we think it's going to get. And now that the history is out, for example, when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, there were people, just to use another analogy, that had nothing but white faces because all the blood left their head. Because the people that knew, in fact, the attorney that came in, they called the attorney for Lehman Brothers in. And he said, okay, what do you want? And they said, we need you to draw bankruptcy papers. And he laughed at them. He's like, all right, nice joke. Really, why am I here? And they said, no, we really want you. He said, and he was stunned. He said, do you realize that that's really the end of that's a financial Armageddon? Because he knew, the insiders knew how much was connected to it. The quadrillions and derivatives.
Mm-hmm.
What quadrillions?
Mm-hmm.
We can't even picture $1 trillion.
I know.
And we're talking quadrillions of, this is what people don't understand. It's not just the money printing. It's derivatives. Let me explain what a derivative is and why everybody has them. You just bought a car and you paid $10,000 for the car. I'm talking 70s now, I guess. So you pay $10,000 for the car. And so you owe $10,000 to the bank, so you get insurance. You have to get insurance in this country, I don't know about others, to cover that in case it's decimated or whatever, the bank is paid off. So you do that, and then let's say someone says, I'd like to get an insurance policy on Rich's car also. And let's say that's allowed. Somebody else, let's say my mom wants to get a $10,000 policy on my car in case I crash it, so that she can buy me another one. And for some reason, the insurance company allows that. And then my next door neighbor hears about it, and he wants to get a $10,000 policy on my car in case it crashes, in case I crash and demolish it. And then it just keeps spreading like this coronavirus, and before you know it, you got 3 million.
Seems like a lot of people in your circles don't think you can drive well.
That's right.
I'm just kidding, but yeah, it's good.
Well, what they know is eventually, if you get enough insurance policies on enough different people's cars,
mm-hmm.
some are going to pay off.
That's right.
So what happens is companies create these derivatives, which is the same thing on the car. So now millions of people have policies on my car. What happens if I crash it?
Yeah,
well, then the insurance company's gone.
Correct.
They're wiped out. Well, that's what they have done with mortgages, with stocks, with companies, with banks. They've got quadrillions
mm-hmm.
of derivatives separate insurance policies and all these different things. So if one goes under, like Lehman Brothers, that's
Yeah.
got, I think the number then was 4 point some quadrillion all over the world.
Wow.
Now that number is, I don't know how many multiple folds higher. What they did was they put a patch on it and pumped and pumped and pumped until now it's happened again. And now this is when I think it really goes bad, like early next year. One of these big banks, probably Deutsche Bank or HSBC, those are the big ones. Or make it smaller ones like a Wells Fargo or something like that go under before, just like we had Bear Stearns and one or two other little financial companies go under before Lehman Brothers. In fact, I never heard of Lehman Brothers before Lehman Brothers.
I didn't either.
And so you just don't know which one is actually going to be the big bomb. But I think it's going to be Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was even decimated after 2009. I think it went down to or just after that, $60 some a share. It's under $6 a share now. It's 5 something. Deutsche Bank, that's Germany, and it has derivatives and direct connections to liabilities like derivatives to J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, HSBC, Bank of America, and probably 2 or 3 dozen others I can't even think of right now. They're all interconnected. One goes, just like Lehman Brothers, they're all going to go. And this time, it is so fantastically higher, the interconnecting debt and obligations that are all over these things. That's another thing, collateralized debt obligations. Oh, man. It's just, and most companies, at least in this country and probably all over the world, their bonds should be rated junk.
Correct. But they're AAA. Yeah.
They're AAA, right.
Yeah. Yeah, the rating system. They're already talking about different countries now. I read a thing about Canada that it's going to be reduced in its rating and stuff just based on its debt. And I mean, this is going to happen all over the world, right? They're going to start, looking at different ratings of different countries. The biggest debtor. But isn't America the biggest debtor nation of the entire world?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Oh,
so
what? We might not there's a ratio used per GDP.
Okay.
Japan actually might be worse.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because if you look at Japan, I mean, they've been inflating for over 30 years and their economy is still garbage. They've never been able to get out of it. If you actually look at Japan, I mean, they're a prime example of someone that they can't get out of the rut they're in.
And they never will.
No.
That comes down to there's another cycle, and we're in this cycle now in the United States, where if you don't have enough children,
correct,
you end up with, they said Japan, it was called the lost decade. And like you said, that lost decade is now 30 years. It's now 3 lost decades. One of the best things I heard to describe it is, in Japan, they sell more adult diapers than they do baby diapers.
Yes.
And an economy like ours, which is based upon spending, consumer spending, consumption, that is you always need a big percentage of the population that needs to go through their big spending times, which is 35 to, or basically 25 to 45 years old.
Yeah, correct.
So, and that's always what the demographics, what they went on television and things like that, the 25 to 35 or 45, whatever, correct. 25 to 45 group, because they're the big spenders.
Correct.
Once you get to 45, you start switching your mindset into, maybe I shouldn't be spending all this money. You're not having kids now, so you don't need the big house.
Correct.
So you start getting rid of stuff.
Yep.
You start thinking about saving for retirement. There's a switch in the mindset. And now that the baby boomers I'm the end of the baby boomer generation. I was born in 1960. That's usually the cutoff year.
Yep.
So I'll be 60 this year. I'm definitely not a big spender. Even if I had the money, I wouldn't be.
Correct.
I'm just not in that cycle of life. Well, nobody's, percentage-wise, nobody's in that cycle of life anymore compared to what it was.
Yeah. And moving forward, are they going to be the same as they were before this entire thing? I mean, that's what I'm saying, is I think the psyches of 30-year-olds are going to change. 20-year-olds, I mean, I think overall people are going to look at, at least saving more. Therefore, they won't be spending as much. Therefore, you're going to get a contraction in the economy.
Yeah, and here's another factor that I don't even know how to factor in. We have so many people in this country in their 20s that are still living at home. Or they're out on their own, but they're barely there as far as making it economically. I know several people of in their mid-20s, things like that, and they're barely above water in a small apartment.
Correct.
It's see, because what's happened is taxes and inflation have eaten it away.
Yes.
This is why now you have to have two people in the household working full-time jobs just to make it.
Correct.
That was unheard of even when I was a teenager.
Correct. Yeah. And again, it's such a tragedy as well too, right? Because again, it was designed that didn't actually have to be. But now, like you said, I mean, to make things go for the most part, it depends on your standard of living. But yeah, I mean, it's taking two full-time incomes for the most part with the majority of, Westerners.
Yes. And that's, that was part of indoctrination and training too, that we
Sure.
got to that point. Plus it hides the fact that there is inflation and that there is a problem with the economy and there's a problem with printing. All of a sudden now you move women into the workforce, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying what happened was instead of one major income person in the house, now you have two.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go on the record and say it's actually bad overall. Now, when you're forced into a situation, it's one of those things. But if it's an act of choice and you don't have to, I think it's much better for the woman to stay home, look after the children, that whole thing. I think that's the way God designed it. Again, I'm not against women working. Again, most times it's forcefully done in this place. And they say, this is feminism and this is women's rights. But they had it better off when they didn't have to work. They just don't understand that, But again, I do think that they should be able to work. It makes them happy. But I think that women that stay home, raise the children, all that, they're way more blessed. I mean, they're really putting into, what's important. And I think, speaking of which, I think through this whole thing, the shock to, the whole system, to the world, people are going to be re-examining what's the most important, what is important in life, So I think, like you talked about how the psyche changes, not just for people that are in retirement or going into retirement. I think a lot of people are going to start looking and saying, well, wait a minute, what if this happens again in 2 more years? What if there's another virus? What if there's anything, war, anything? Now they're going to have this idea that things like this can happen. It's not just in the Great Depression. We had this mindset that nothing like this could ever happen. It would just keep going and going. And sure, we'd have some recessions, but no big deal. But everyone talked about the Great Depression as something that was like forgotten. It was in the past. Even the elite and these people, they're saying we're never going to let it happen. Right. But like you said, they can't with all their power, with all their money printing, with all their tricks, they can't stop a crash.
No, and it's all psychology, and the psychology has been changed forever.
Yeah, that's another thing. The psychology has been changed forever. Like, that's the question is, the minute all of a sudden these states start resuming, how many people are going to be running out, into theaters and watching the latest movie? Like, I think people are going to be really surprised when they start seeing the numbers, right? People are going to maybe just be a little bit more cautious. People are going to say, well, instead of taking that vacation, maybe we're going to save. Or maybe instead of going to, a restaurant once a week, we're going to go to a restaurant once a month.
And some may not want to go back at all because they're so fearful of what may happen.
Correct.
They're already talking about it's going to come back in the fall and it could be worse. And then it could be coming back next spring too. It's like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing might not happen anyways, but you're right. There's that fear component. I'm taking even the fear component out of it. Just people that are just, taking their time, assessing things, but also looking at it like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be so in debt. I mean, this thing happens and all of a sudden we're at the food bank. That's not a good thing. We don't have to be at the food bank. Maybe we could save a little bit of money that if something happened, we could actually keep, food on our dinner table for a few months, 2-3 months, without actually having to go in a scenario where we're like, oh my goodness, if we don't get this check from the government, being that reliant on the government is a scary thing if you don't need to. And a lot of people don't need to. It's tough. But again, you just have to reduce your standard of living a little bit, maybe for a time and a season. It doesn't have to be forever. But I think it's smart and wise and prudent for people to start thinking. I mean, I always use this analogy, in the Bible with Joseph, he became like the second most powerful in Egypt. But before that, it was like, the whole idea was there's going to be 7 years of famine coming up, but there was going to be 7 years of plenty. In the 7 years of plenty, store up for those 7 years that are bad, right? So, it was an illustration of making sure that you're protected for the future. But not only did he save his own people in Egypt, he saved all the Israelites. He saved his own family. The whole story of Joseph, if you're familiar with
exactly.
It's such a profound story, but again, it's smart. It's something that's very biblical. There's no doubt when it comes to making sure that you're smart and you're a good steward. Everyone talks about being a good steward of your money. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. What is money, Rich? What is truly being a good steward of your money? What's the difference between money and currency?
Well, money is what we don't have. Currency is actually what we have. Money has, you can look up the definition of what money is versus currency. I don't remember all the rules, but the main one is It is actually, it has an intrinsic value, meaning it is backed by something of value. Traditionally, it's been gold or silver all through history. You look at the Roman Empire, and they would have gold or silver coins, or even copper,
Yep.
because copper was worth a lot of money. And what happened is they created their own problems when they started cutting those precious metals out of their own currency. They started They started minting coins that were less and less valuable. They went from gold to silver to copper and tin.
And then they
tin.
dilute it. They put other metals in there to dilute even their.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct.
So eventually what happens is, and it's almost an instant overnight mindset, hey, this isn't worth anything. And that's when you get things like runs on the bank and like during the Great Depression. And it's everything we're talking about is the psychology of the herd, to use a uncomplimentary term. When there is no preparation mindset, like you're talking about with Joseph, look how many people were blessed through a disaster.
Yeah.
7 years of a disaster. Because the mindset was right, there wasn't a panic. And for 7 years, people were blessed from all over the world because Egypt prepared.
Correct.
So even we're talking about things that sound bad, and they are bad. There's a lot of good that can come out of it. And every crisis that has ever happened in the world, there are people who are smart and don't panic, come out the other side much better off.
Correct.
You have more millionaires made in a depression than you do any other time.
Correct.
And greater transfer of wealth. It's for those who keep their head. I always think of the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And the story in there is during the Great Depression, there was a run on the banks. And the mean banker, Potter, was buying up the shares of the savings and loan at 50 cents on the dollar. But the people at the savings and loan ended up keeping their heads. And they then were able to be blessed. They had nice houses versus people that went with Potter, had to live in his rundown apartments and stuff like that and got foreclosed. So anyway, it's a good real life analogy of people, and people were severely blessed in that movie, who stayed on the good side, who prepared and did what was right. It was actually a good thing in the end. It was a cleansing. And that's what I see this as.
Absolutely, yeah. And we don't have time to really go into all the fundamentals of gold and silver and getting into precious metals. I mean, I'm sure you've heard people talk, but I strongly, advocate people researching, getting educated, and just knowing kind of the money matrix and seeing kind of the way it's been all throughout history. This is not just in our lifetime. This is what, empires, governments have done, since the start of time. A great series, and I've linked to it in the description, is called The Hidden Secrets of Money by Mike Maloney. It's a 10-part series. It's absolutely incredible. Choose, if you have the time, to go through it. It's almost like waking up to the Matrix. It's an incredible 10-part series. It is linked in the description, called Hidden Secrets of Money. I strongly advocate that you look into it just so you can kind of understand where we're at right now. A lot of the stuff that was done in that series, was done even up to, I think, about 2015, 2014. And I mean, it rings very true with everything that you're seeing right now. I mean, we're pretty much at the end game as far as the economic collapse, the reset we've been talking about, the world kind of establishing a new world reserve currency, all these things. And we talked before about there's a very good likelihood it will be digital. And, that's not to say that it won't be backed by something of value like gold or silver. Again, there's a very likelihood it will be. But let's just get into the digital aspect, because you're seeing it. I mean, myself personally, and I know this is going to be controversial for a lot of people, and usually it's they haven't been educated, or they haven't really researched into it. But let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. We could talk about other cryptocurrencies like Monero and Litecoin and all of this. But really the reality is that, I've been involved in Bitcoin since about 2010, 2011. I've seen a lot of stuff, people saying all sorts of things. It's the mark of the beast. It was created by the CIA. The reality is that Bitcoin, you cannot control it. You can't manipulate it. That's why you're going to see governments creating their own. You're going to see banks creating their own. Bank of America coin, Fed coin. You heard a little bit about the stimulus. They were talking about the Fed coin, being able to get money to people. I mean, we could see that in the future. But let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin, Rich, because I know you've been following it for a while. And again, I've looked at it as something, another great way to get outside of the matrix, because, I mean, you and I can send money directly to each other with no middleman. no fees, and it's instant like email. And yet people, strongly oppose these, things as saying that they're evil. Again, it's no different than a technology that's been created. You can use it for good or bad. Blockchain that will be definitely controlled, and bad blockchains, but Bitcoin is not one of them. What do you say to people that come down and say, what do you think so much when it comes to Bitcoin? What's your views overall? What you've seen as you've been following it?
Well, let's first talk about the mark of the beast aspect, because I know a lot of people think that way. The mark of the beast is always going to have worship attached to it.
Yes. Nobody
worships Bitcoin. As far as, it's not an idol. You can't even see it. There's nothing tattooed on your hand or your forehead necessary to buy or sell it. It biblically, it loses a lot of that aspect if you really look at it.
Yes.
And I know people are paranoid about the mark of the beast because we have the technology now to make that possible.
Yeah, they're saying there's going to be a chip in the vaccine that's coming out next year, and they're saying that's the mark of the beast. And I always sit there and say, listen, guys, it's a form of worship. It will be something that you do with your own volition. It's a choice. It's not going to be forced upon you. If you read Revelation, I mean, you're not going to be damned for eternity because you were forcefully given something, or let's just say your children, or let's just say, there's all these different scenarios. But again, I agree with you, Rich, that it's something that is a form of worship. It's attached to a form of allegiance. I always look at it like it's a form of worship or allegiance to the world leader or the world president or whatever. That's the way we're going to know that we're seeing that, in my opinion.
Right. Now, let me give you a disclaimer here. There's one aspect, you were talking about the definition of money versus a currency. Technically, Bitcoin cannot be money because I can't hold it in my hand.
Correct. But yeah, and that's exactly it, because a lot of people looked at it as a form of money, but really what I think it's turning out to be is a store of value.
Yes, and Al, we talked about, I sent you something about where I see the cycle of Bitcoin going.
Correct, and we can talk about that because, again, I think it's very likely that this is what we're going to see, not just with precious metals, but also Bitcoin. I think that there's definitely even a huge commodity crash that's coming, but I think a lot of this stuff is going to go down before it goes up.
Yes, and the way I see it, and I could be 100% wrong, in hindsight, Elliott waves are perfect. They always are, but it's hindsight. When they're fleshing themselves out, you can guess wrong, but you can get a pretty good idea. And I think Elliott waves. This is herd mentality too. In wave one, that's where people start getting excited about an asset for the first time in a long time. Think early 2000s with gold and silver, and that lasted to 2011, roughly 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of a sudden, the psychology changed a little bit. By 2011, 2012, the Fed wasn't printing so much money anymore. They were talking about actually tightening. They didn't do it for a long time, but they first talked about stopping expanding their balance sheet. So people who were getting into gold and silver because they were fighting inflation, they were fighting deflation, the Federal Reserve, they were printing like mad. Now that they were starting to ease up on that because they had patched it over well enough to where things were this new lower hum of a normal, but they were able to get that mentality into the people. Oh, okay, we're not going to be like we were before. Even Obama said this at the time. We're in the new normal, 1% growth per year, and that's sort of a stagflation thing too, without the unemployment. So that's a classic start of a wave two in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
The even waves in the 5-wave sequence, they're correctives. So we entered there's no doubt we entered a wave two at the beginning of 2011, 2012 in gold and silver, and more recently in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is on a little bit of a compressed schedule versus gold and silver, and I think that's because it hasn't been around long enough to create its own super cycle, which I won't get into that, but it's just a larger degree of what's going on.
Yeah, it's just over 10 years old, right? Really, if you think about it.
Right, and silver and gold, well, they've been around since the Earth's been around.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a little bit different.
Correct.
So gold and silver, the correctives come in 3 ways. They subdivide into 3 waves, and gold went down and silver went way down, and then it shot back up. Now it's near all-time highs. I'm talking U.S. dollars. I know it is in other currencies.
Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't made a new high. And if it doesn't, we're due for that third leg down. And I'm saying if it doesn't soon, within
So
the next
how
couple
far
months,
down do you think it's going? Like say gold, for example, I think it's around 1750-ish right now. What
Right.
do you think the low is on the next correction?
it could be as low, I think, as 800,
Okay.
maybe even a little less. Uh, wave twos can retrace 100% of the wave one. So wherever the wave one started, I believe it started at 400 and some dollars. I don't think it'll go that low, but it could.
Mm-hmm.
In technical analysis speaking, it could.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin started at around 6 cents from what I can see on what the chart I had, or relatively quickly went to 6 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at that as the low. Technically speaking, it looks like Bitcoin has done its first wave down
Mm-hmm.
from 20,000 down to what was about 3,500, let's
Correct.
say.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then it went back up to where it is now, and it's been kind of hovering in that 10 to 12,000 range, a little less, a little more, but just pretty much the average probably the last couple of months has been right around that 10,000 mark.
Correct.
If it doesn't go up very soon, because time-wise, it's starting to run out of time to make that new high above 20,000.
Keep in mind, though, that the halvening is coming up, I think, in about 16 days, where it gets cut in half. The supply every 10 minutes, you're familiar with every 4 years, the Bitcoin supply gets cut in half. And everything historically, if you look at it in the history that it's existed, it's got huge run-ups after that takes place. Because for miners, for example, they're used to getting right now 12.5 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. It's now going to be cut in half in the next 2 weeks' time. So therefore, you usually see a big sell-off because they need to get more money to operate their mine and their equipment and all that. But anyways, one significant thing with this year, though, Rich, is the great halvening that's taking place. It started off at 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Then it went, it cut in half to 25. Then it went to 12.5, and now we're moving into the next one of 6 whatever. So that is going to take place here in 2 weeks, which will be interesting. And usually, it doesn't just shoot through the moon. Afterwards, it actually goes down for a little bit, but then it usually has a pretty strong bull run after every one. Again, it might not take place, but that's a little bit different in 2020. Is that we're hitting a cut in half of the supply of Bitcoin, like it does every 4 years.
Yeah, that's very interesting because the timing, like I said, we're in that window where it's got to make its mind up one way or the other.
Correct.
If its wave 2 is done, it should shoot up very soon. And if it's not, it's going to shoot down very soon. It's just another thing with Elliott waves is there's a time aspect to it. If you have like the gold run was pretty much 8 years. 10 years, 10 11 years.
Yep.
And you wouldn't expect wave 2s, they can really be drawn out, but you wouldn't expect wave 2 to be longer than the wave 1. And we're already 8 or 9 years into this correction on gold and silver. So it's getting long in the tooth, to put it bluntly. And so is Bitcoin with its smaller cycle. So it's time also tells along with price. So we're going to know that soon. Now I can give you a negative with Bitcoin right now. And that is, for the moment, when Bitcoin ran all the way up to 20,000, many people, I'd say most people, were buying it for the investment purposes.
Sure.
They were hoping for the grand slam eventually. And I'm not saying that isn't going to happen, but there's been a fundamental change in the last few years, and I've noticed it too, where a lot of people now are using it as a transfer only. They're keeping their money in cash, going into Bitcoin when they need to purchase something anonymously, let's say, and then they pull it right back. Well, they pull it out when they purchase it. So that's a fundamental change in how people are looking at Bitcoin versus the early days.
Correct.
So you have, and this is why wave 2s do this up, down, because you have these fights back and forth. Which one's going to win? Well, when everybody loses, but let's just say Bitcoin goes down to 6 cents. I don't think it will, but I give you another figure. Let's just say it goes down to 1,000.
Sure.
At some point, the psychology is going to change. The wave 3. This is the same thing with gold and silver, where everybody knows it's real. It's not. We think it's going to the moon. We know it is because of what's going on.
Correct.
That's when everything shoots up. That's what's going to happen at the end, somewhere between probably next January and maybe a couple years after that. We're going to see this unbelievable everything that has any kind of distance from the kind of currency we've had. I think everybody's going to pile into it because nothing else is going to have any faith.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just going to be people rushing to get out of whatever it is because, I mean, it's going to be everyone's currencies are going to be crashing, right? It's going to be hyperinflating. People are going to rush to something, right?
Right.
You know, even if they bring up their new, digital things, they're going to say, well, how is it this time going to be any different? How do I know that their digital currency or what they're wanting me to have confidence in, whether the banks are saying, well, it's safe, I've said this for a long time. If you notice that they always play the fear game when it comes to Bitcoin, like, oh, it's going to be hacked or, it's for pornographers or you see this in the media all the time because, they have no way of controlling. I know a lot of people think that they might be able to, but again, they don't understand the fundamentals of the blockchain and exactly what's set up. That's why you're going to see, them propose their own, digital currencies. And I think that there's going to be in the future, not just one. I think there's going to be hundreds of thousands, but they might ride on one central reserve, currency itself. But there'll be lots of different things floating around. It's kind of like there's lots of different email providers. There'll be lots of different cryptos in that sense, right? But I know that there'll be like those libertarians outside of the system, and it might be like a barter and trade type scenario where you're doing it really underground, to stay off the recording and the surveillance, but it's definitely going to happen. And what's so fundamental is that you got every country that can participate in that, So I tell people all the time, when it comes to it, it's a learning curve. You really got to do your research. And I always say out of the three, gold, silver, and Bitcoin, always look at researching gold and silver. Get some of that before you even start looking into crypto because, it's a whole other world, There's a lot to learn in that and to study and what's good, what's bad, all these type of things because, there's a lot, even in that crash that you were talking about, Rich, I think a lot of cryptos are going to be decimated in that crash. Just like in the .com crash, many .coms went belly up, but also some powerhouses resulted from it, like Amazons and Googles, They didn't just thrive through it. They became complete monsters. They became worldwide phenomena. So the same thing will happen with crypto. The same thing will happen with a lot of these crashes. It's almost like it shakes out the weak players and away you go. So you got to look at whatever you do, understand the system you live in, and we're going to talk, more and more about it. You've got to look at and understand, how do I not only escape it, but how do I preserve my purchasing power for the future? Like, a lot of people have this idea that, next year is the New World Order and we're going to get chipped and the mark of the beast and, the end of Revelations and we're at the end. Well, the question is, hypothetically, what if we're not? What if we're not? What if there's a lot more time left? I personally think that we have, many generations left. Again, I could be wrong. But the question is, nobody likes to go hypothetically. What if we do have multiple generations? What if this is kind of a shakeup, a judgment to all the nations of the world? It's got them off their timetable. They have their timeline. Remember this very clearly. They have their timeline, but God has his. And understand that he's sovereign and he is completely sovereign, and his providence, it supersedes any of man's attempts. Look up Psalms 33:10. He spoils their plans, it says. He laughs at their things. So understand that we might be looking at a scenario where it's actually going to hold back things. It's like a Tower of Babel 2.0, where everyone was getting too close, too global, too unified, and all of a sudden something happens, regardless whether it was man's evil or God was orchestrating it. The very fact is, God allowed it to happen. And really look at another scenario that really this is moving things further away from globalization, not closer together. Again, especially in the interim or the short term. I think you agree with that, Rich, that you don't think in the next couple of years we're going to see even stronger ties of globalization with China.
Especially not with China. No, I'm with you there. This is very anti-globalization. And I think what really hit home with people that paid attention was the fact that 90% of our pharmaceutical bases are the chemicals and stuff that go into these pharmaceuticals. Yeah. 90% of them come from China.
Who thought of that? Who in the right mind thought that was a good idea to depend on all of our pharmaceuticals and drugs to come from China? Like, didn't they think that could possibly be a massive disaster if all of a sudden China was hit with a nuke bomb? They were out of commission for like 2 months and we couldn't get any drugs? Does that logically, make sense? I don't know how people got so far off track where they would think that was a good idea to rely on one country 90%.
Yeah, well, that's your government for you. That's not looking out for
that's
people.
Profits. That's profits. And people, they're saying right now that people are gladly probably spend a little bit more to know that it was made in America. or made in Canada, rather than rely on the fact of all the aggression and distaste they're going to have for, China and other countries. So that's why it's going to change. People are like, they're going to have to answer to their shareholders when they're going, oh, well, we're doing this for profits. They'll be like, it's not good enough anymore. My grandma died, right? Like there's going to be scenarios where people are going to look at it, and it's not like, everyone talks about it's all about profit, and they're right on that. But again, sometimes people take life over profit, and again, shareholders are people as well. They're going to have to answer to the shareholders why they're outsourcing this and jeopardizing so many people, not to mention jeopardizing their stock, because if they do something wrong and there's a disaster, that stock's going to go to zero.
No, absolutely.
So that's why I think that, there's going to be a lot of change. It's interesting looking around. There's so many different ideas of how this is all going to play out. And I'm not saying I know exactly how it's going down, but you can see the writing on the wall, and you can see exactly what's going on as far as the future moving further away from this whole idea of globalization. I mean, Canada's already talking about it. I've seen multiple countries. Do you think that the EU is going to be stronger after this or more fractured?
More fractured.
Exactly. The EU. So all these attempts to do remember when the EU started, all the Christians were like, here it is, Revelations, right? Here are the 12 nations, EU, this was it, the UN, all the stuff. They had it all mapped out. Well, I'm telling you right now, you're going to see an absolute fracturing over the next decade of the EU. That's going to fall apart. I mean, Germany was the only thing holding it together, and Germany is about to completely collapse economically as well.
Correct. Yeah, at least in the early stages of all this, it's globalization is not the answer. And to complete our thought on China, it was, I don't know, about a month into this whole coronavirus thing that they threatened to cut off our pharmaceutical drugs.
That's right. Not
that anything was wrong with them. They just were mad at us.
Yeah. They're mad. Yeah. It's like, we're going to cut you off from all of your drugs. And again, you got to remember how many people, and that's another brutal thing, because they have so many people on medication. Well, what happens if all these people can't get their medication for like a month or two? I mean, can you imagine the disaster of just the civil unrest and just what's going to go on in any country that basically they can't get their medication?
Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more you realize how fragile of a position we are in right now, and it won't take much to tip it. It really won't. I'm seeing people do some weird stuff already that is totally out of what I thought people would do. Where I walk my dog at the park, I don't know if I told you this the other day or if it happened the day after we talked. It's about 25 acres, huge.
Yep.
They've got the playgrounds and the public benches and stuff like that all closed down. So it's only people walking their dogs. And when I'm there, it's usually me, and maybe I see one other dog 20 acres away from me. Well, a lady pulled up. I was about a quarter mile from her, but I could see what she was doing. She pulled 2 chairs out of her car, although she was the only one in the car, so I guess she was expecting somebody to come a little bit later. And she put them under a tree for the shade, and she set them up about 12 feet apart, so I guess she was wanting to do the social distancing with whoever was coming. But for the next half hour, she was the only one there, sitting in the park. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
With a mask on.
Yep.
I'm like, what is wrong with people?
Yeah. Better be safe than sorry.
Is she expected to cough and have that go a quarter mile and hit me? Because it doesn't protect the person.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's all that kind of idea. I mean, for me, looking at the fact of I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember early, like even February, even March, to tell you the truth, everyone was saying, do not wear a mask. Nothing will happen. You probably remember this, right? But everyone was saying, do not wear a mask. If anything, you'll have a greater chance getting the virus, right? Interesting how everyone turned. And again, that was the time when you obviously could say, I can't trust my government or the media 110%, because they wanted those masks for the people on the front line, like in the hospitals, right? But rather than be honest and just say, hey, here's the scenario, they basically went so far as to say you'll actually have a greater chance of getting coronavirus if you wear a mask. They were saying they went so far as to say do not wear a mask when you're out in public. Well, here's the reality. People are going to be wearing masks for a long time. And people say, I'm not going to wear a mask. Well, you'll be refused at a store. I mean, that's what's going to happen. I mean, more and more stores are going to be like, they will refuse entry. You see that sign where they say, no shoes, no shirt, no service. It's going to be like no mask, no shirt, no shoes, no service. That's the reality. So you can be mad all you want, but the fact is we're being put into a position where you're just going to have to do that in order to get any service from stores. But you're right. The world has changed. It's not going back. I explain to people all the time, look, man, your world that you knew is not going back. It's like 9/11. After 9/11, you started taking off your shoes when you went through the metal detectors. Heck, there were hardly any.
Throw very good water away in the trash can right next to the TSA agents. And if they're worried about it being a bomb, why are they standing right next to it?
Exactly. It's so ridiculous. But if you thought things changed after 9/11, get ready, because after this, things are going to change. The good news is, where I look at it, is we're going away from globalization. But that's not to say that governments in their own countries can get draconian in the sense that they can overreach and take away people's freedoms. And that's what's great about people, standing their rights, protest. I think, though, as long as they do it smart and not giving them a reason to come down hard on them, because again, it will backfire on people that are trying to do something and it becomes more extreme. But as long as people are doing it smart, they can't do anything about it, right? And you're seeing that. You're not seeing anyone taking down all these protests. If anything, you got the president saying, right on, keep going, right? So I think it's good for people to do that, but just remember that, your world moving forward is not going to be the same, but also that you do have a bit of time to start getting prepared for the big crash that's coming. This is what Rich and I are talking about, what we're trying to implore you to really look into, is saying, look, this is not just going to be a V-shaped recovery. It was that darn, hoax of a coronavirus or whatever you're looking at. It doesn't really matter. Even if you think this or that, the fact is, it's the pin that popped the bubble. The bubble's been popped, and we're headed towards, they're going to inflate. But the fact is, they're going to get to a point where they can't do anything any longer, and it will be like a house of cards. It will be like dominoes, and it won't just be America. It will be the entire world, and it will be free fall speed, and people won't even know what to do because it will be dropping so fast. I personally think that you're going to see crashes in the NASDAQ or the stock market or whatever, crashing 60, 70% over a period of time next year or the year after. What do you think?
I see a low in the stock market of at least 5,000, if not lower.
Yeah, so you're looking at this as a crash. But again, we're talking about the stock, but we're talking about real estate. What do you think, real estate prices, how much do you think in the real estate market it's going to crash? For example, we know that it's in certain states, certain places, it's so incredibly overvalued. But in reality, what do you see when it comes to real estate? Do you see that another sector that's going to get hit pretty hard here in the next year or two?
Yes, that sector really wasn't fixed. It was papered over, and it's gone. It's not as bad as it was in 2008, but it's back up there again. In fact, I can see the worst of it right here in the Phoenix area. We've been growing at 6.5% last year. I think it was 5.5% the year before that, 5%. These are numbers that were in the mid, 2005 to 2007 numbers all over the country. So this has been happening, and if you've noticed, rents have been going up everywhere. And we've got a lot of corporations this time who bought houses to rent them out or flip them and things like that. It wasn't just individuals. So they've created their own separate bubble with that. It will crash because for several reasons. One, how many people right now you have 26 million more people that can't afford to buy a house. And if they're in a house, they're going to have to sell it.
Correct.
Because chances are their mortgage is so high that whatever they're getting from unemployment isn't going to cut the mustard. So that's going to happen. So that maybe that 26 million is probably more like 40 million households that it affects directly.
Correct.
And all these other multiple factors are going into that too. Real estate is going to go to the dirt. It just is like commodities.
Yes.
It isn't going to be the thing that people are going to want to pile into. They're going to want to pile into the necessities. Look at people pile into toilet paper, ammunition, alcohol.
Yes.
I haven't heard cigarettes, but I'm sure people have been hoarding that too.
I'm sure.
And people need to remember this. People want their basic vices to be maintained. So if we have to go for a short period of time to a barter system with your neighbors, I'd love to have, I don't drink, but I'd love to have some whiskey in case my neighbor drank and he had toilet paper and I didn't.
Sure.
Be able to do some swapping out. And this is what people did during the Great Depression as well.
Correct.
And people don't know that, but that happened a lot. A lot of people who had skills helped their neighbor for dinner.
Yes.
And things like that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. What are people looking for? What was the first things people went for this time? And
so what do you suggest people then do? Then they're sitting here right now and they're kind of wondering, what should I do? And again, just for a disclaimer, we're not financial advisors. We're not, prophets. It has nothing to do with this. We're just seriously concerned with what we're seeing. We've been talking about this for a long time. I know Rich, through his YouTube channel, has been doing multiple videos throughout the years since 2008. Me more behind the scenes, but I've been very interested in economics. I've definitely been into gold, silver, also Bitcoin, for the last decade or so. And to me, I'm just seeing kind of the writing on the wall. I don't expect people to freak out and get scared, but this is a time to be smart and say, look, if there is something bad coming, and we're talking about, being overvalued and they're printing so much money, everyone can see exactly what's going on. Where's this money coming from? I mean, and if this worked, if you honestly believe that this is going to work, then why didn't they do this in the good times? Why are anyone even having to work? If they can just print money, why do you pay taxes, right? Why is anyone even paying taxes? They can just print the money they need for the taxes, right? This is a whole massive lie. You want to talk about a grand scheme of beyond measures is the entire money matrix that they have taught people that is just normal. It's not normal at all. It's one big lie. And you're going to suffer because of it if you get hooked into it. That's why you can take this time right now and listen and start studying. Like the series I talked about that's in the description of this video, Hidden Secrets of Money. It's a 10-part series. It's totally worth your time. Watch episode 1, and if you don't want to watch any more, don't. But also look into things that we're talking about here and use your own mind. Don't listen to what we're saying and just take it for the gospel truth. We're putting all this information out because we're saying, listen, man, like things are about, if you think things are rough now, you haven't seen nothing yet. I mean, it hasn't even happened yet because they're giving the appearance that everything is going to be okay because they're printing all this money, trillions of dollars. Like you said, what are they at the 4th round now for infrastructure?
Right.
So, yeah, they're just using it as an excuse now because they're like, look, we can just blame this on the coronavirus, right? I mean, it's perfect for them because the fact is they had to get all this approval. And even though when they did it, now they can just be like, that darn coronavirus, let's get $2 trillion for infrastructure. Let's get $2 trillion for the banks. Let's get $2 trillion for they can print money for everyone. And remember, the people that are getting their $1,200 check, literally it's the scraps. But remember, all this money that they're giving to everyone, it's your money. If you're a taxpayer in America, that's your money. That's your money in future, like as far as the inflation. But again, future generations are going to have to pay that. That's why it's an impossibility. I heard, Rich, that literally if the government collected 100% of everyone's money, 100% taxes, it wouldn't even pay the interest on the loan.
Yeah, there's no out that way. There is one out, and it will come, and that is a total reset.
Correct. Yeah, it's like a default. It's like it's literally not saying you're going bankrupt, but it's instead of doing that, you inflate it to zero. You do it that way, so it's based on the purchasing power. You just dilute the purchasing power of all your people. But you're right. The best way out of it, and nobody has to owe anything, is a reset or a default. What do you think will happen then when you see a complete global reset or default?
Let me give you the same model will be all over the world, but since I'm very familiar with the system we have, it's already started. Most people don't know that Trump has taken the Federal Reserve, which was its private company that just faked like they were under the control of the government because like the president could always appoint the federal chairman. But do you think the federal chairman had to listen to the president or the Treasury Secretary? No, until now. During this crisis with coronavirus, Trump has taken, he's done a switch. There was something in one of the emergency acts. I'm not even sure which one. He activated so many. You'd have to be a scholar to know the difference.
Yeah.
But one of them gave him the power to actually take the Federal Reserve and put it underneath the Treasury. He's done that. So now the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, he has to answer to the Treasury Secretary, which is Steve Mnuchin, and his boss is Donald Trump. That's stage one. That's already happened, folks.
Correct.
And people aren't talking about it, but it's happened in the last, 2-3 weeks that happened.
Yes.
Now, he's already set up something called special purpose vehicles. Very complex thing. I don't understand it all myself. The bottom line is, eventually, if this works right, within a year or two, the Federal Reserve will take the debt of our country and it will be on the back of the Fed, which is a difference. Right now, all the debt is on the government's back, on our back, the taxpayers. So with these special purpose vehicles, it's slowly transferring the debt, the actual debt, back to the lender, which is the Federal Reserve. It's actually pretty brilliant if it works.
So that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. In the meantime, I think this is why Trump doesn't care about printing to infinity.
Okay.
Because now he has the ability to stop the Fed from doing it. Now, you remember how much he trashed the Fed before this crisis?
Correct.
He kept almost every other tweet every other day was about trashing the Fed. They're slow. They're not reacting. And I was like, what is he doing? Because if you understand Trump, he's a marketer.
Yes.
Big time. If he was marketing something with the Fed, I'm like, what is he getting ready to do? And this was it. This reorganization of the Fed. And even the federal, I was like, is this for real? The Federal Reserve Chairman came out and said, I now answer to Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. So it's happened, folks. That's stage one. What has to happen is all the debt, no matter who holds it, it's got to go through a jubilee, like the Bible says. Because we don't have debt jubilees like we're supposed to every 50 years. We're in this mess. In fact, because we have debt, we're in this mess. And the Bible says you're not supposed to charge usury, which is interest.
Yeah.
And we got away from that principle. The Constitution doesn't have usury. It's just they print the money. That is what we're going to go back to. And that's what the whole rest of the world will go back to. Not just that, but here's the way I see it. And I could be 180 degrees wrong on this, guys. Anybody listening? But this is where I see it going. My best guess is that the dollar, whatever new dollar we have, whether it's probably going to be digital. The new dollar is going to be backed internationally in international trade by either gold, silver, or oil, or a combination of the three. So that, let's just say, our trade with the UK every year is going on, and at the end of the year we have to settle. This is the way it's going to be, in my mind. Okay, we imported $10 million more of goods. We owe the UK $10 million because we had a $10 million trade deficit with the UK. This is why Trump is bringing back industry. Think China. So let me continue with what's going on. So at the end of the year, we have to settle. We take our gold, $10 million worth, and by the way, gold will have to be reset way higher for this to work. We take $10 million worth of gold and we ship it to the UK. UK, they have a trade deficit with China, let's say, of $8 million. So they have to take $8 million of gold that we just paid them and give it to China. So gold will be transferred all over the world one time a year. And then that'll settle all the accounts. Everybody starts at zero. That will encourage every country to be manufacturers, exporters. A true capitalist system. The people won't have any conversion to gold, even though your currency really is backed by, let's say, gold, silver, oil, whatever, or a combination. The people won't be able to redeem it like they used to before Nixon took us off the gold window in 1973. You used to be able to take $20 to the bank, or $22.50, whatever it was, and they had to give you an ounce of gold for it.
Yeah, I believe it was 71. They did that, and ever since we've been on this absolutely illusionary debt explosion that's going to have massive consequences. If you're listening right now, join us at the after show at youtube.com/celebrate truth. We're going to continue on with our guest, Rich Hopkins from Mr. Thrive and Survive on YouTube. Check it out. The after show is coming up next, but you have to be on youtube.com/celebrate truth. Thanks everyone for listening tonight on Revolution Radio Studio A. We'll be back next week at the same time, same place. Thank you so much. Blessings and good night, everyone. All right, keep going there, Rich. We're on the after show here now on YouTube. If you're listening in, you're tuning in on YouTube, this is going to be the after show. We're privileged to have Rich on here for some more time, but we're just getting into some really good stuff. But I want to hear exactly what you had to say as far as the different stages and what you see, and then we'll maybe get into some questions here in a little bit.
Yeah, I think the stages are going to come fast and furious. This isn't going to be a slow, we're in the slow rollout phase right now. We're trying to I'm hearing a delay.
You got a delay?
Yeah, hold on just a second. All right, I got that fixed. My microphone.
Okay.
Anyway, we're in the stages right now where everything is coming very fast. But then it's going to slow up like we discussed earlier. And we're going to go through this semi back to normal type of deal in the fall, probably late summer, early fall, maybe all the way through into winter. But then when the second half of everything hits, they're going to have to. They won't do it right away because they're still going to want to. The rich people are going to fight to keep it as long as they can.
Sure.
But there will be a time when it's going to be the people are going to revolt if things don't change, and that's when they lose the people. There's two things. Those only two things can be done then: get rid of the people or get rid of the system.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be get rid of the system.
Yeah. So you think basically the implosion will take place sometime next year? That's kind of what you've said throughout this program. I got to ask you a question. When we were talking about crypto and Bitcoin, as far as the U.S., let's just say in general, creating their own crypto, how would that affect Bitcoin? If all of a sudden a government like the United States say we've created our own digital currency, what do you think will happen to other cryptos like Bitcoin when that takes place?
I don't think it will. Well, more people will come into it because they're like, okay, this is the wave of the future. I'm more confident in it that it is trustworthy. The blockchain technology, that type of thing. So it'll have that effect. But I don't think the government governments around the world going to their own digital currency is going to hurt Bitcoin in any way. I just don't see it because I think that's going to be almost like what I was talking about, where I see a gold international or an asset international backed world type of system. Everybody I think will still have their currencies.
Yeah.
But that won't affect the everyday dollar that we have, the non-convertible dollar, and I don't think it'll affect the non-convertible Bitcoin.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I see the same thing. I explain to people all the time. And if anyone actually does have any Bitcoin or they have any cryptocurrencies, I always explain to them because they're like, oh, it's so scary to have that online. You know that you can store Bitcoin offline. You could store Bitcoin in a safe. I explain this to people all the time, but if you're on like Coinbase or you've purchased this before in the past, make sure that if you have any kind of considerable amount of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, don't leave it in an exchange. An exchange can be hacked. Bitcoin, the blockchain has never been hacked, but businesses, companies can be hacked. When you have all of it in one place, especially online, you have that risk. So look into, offline storage. Two good devices are Trezor or Ledger. Those are two great hardware wallets. Just look into, again, if this doesn't apply to you, don't worry about it. But I always let people know, look, man, if you don't get that and store that offline, if you have all of it on the web or in Coinbase or another company, it could be hacked tomorrow. You could wake up tomorrow and lose it all. So just that's smart. In the same way that if you have gold and silver and you have physical, and when we talk about gold and silver, we're not talking about contracts. We're not talking about, buying paper silver. I don't think that's what you're talking about either. Correct, Rich? As far as,
no.
Yeah. Physical silver. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Get some physical silver in your hands. And what I'm saying is you would store it the same way. You would either, hide it, you'd bury it, you'd put it in a safe, you'd do something, but you wouldn't just leave it out. You wouldn't just go to a mall and just leave it out on the table because, someone will come along and grab it and steal it. In the same way, when it comes to crypto, if you don't secure it wisely, it will get stolen. So I always say that to people so they understand the logistics behind what it's like. A lot of people think that, well, crypto's all online. No, you can store it in a safe. You could put it onto a device and bury it in your backyard, just like gold and silver. So when beginning when we were talking before, Rich, about it can't be money in the sense that you can't hold it. It's technical, but you're right on it, but you're not right on it because a lot of people will say it exists online or it's just digital form. That's not necessarily true. You can actually store Bitcoin off of the web and in your safe. So that's something to kind of look at. But any which way you look at this, the present system is coming to an end. So, for example, someone asks the question, Rich, they'll say, well, look, if I have $10,000 in the bank and all of a sudden a complete reset happens and they come up with a digital currency, how much is that $10,000 worth in the new currency? I always sit there and say, look, it's not as like it goes to zero, but that $10,000 might be worth $3,000 of the new U.S. digital currency. How do you see it happening for people that have money and it gets devalued, but again, they come up with a new currency? How much do you think they're going to lose in transferring to the new digital currency from their dollars?
Well, that's a tough one because I see that in a sort of a wave too. I see the U.S. dollar really gaining in value as I think other countries will rush into the safety, quote unquote, of the United States.
Correct.
As they realize we're not going back to normal either. I wouldn't. What the U.S. dollar's index right now, as the index is the U.S. dollar against a basket of currencies around the world. Not all of them, but a basket of the other majors: the British pound, the euro, the yen, the Swiss, that type of thing. There's certain percentages. The greatest percentage of which is us versus the euro. Right now, we were in the upper 90s or mid to upper 90s until this crisis hit. Now we're at 100, 101, 102. In fact, I'll look it up while I'm talking. It has gone up already. And as our stock market was crashing, the dollar was going up. And you notice gold and silver went down. They tend to act inversely to it.
Correct.
That won't last. They're going to go up. They're both going to move in tandem at some point. But
even the ratio, have you looked at how extraordinary the silver to gold ratio is right now? It's like at 110. I mean, if you look out through time back into like 1980, it's never got this high. Historically, it usually sits at around, anywhere from 20 to 60 to 1, the ratio. As far as the gold to silver, it's sitting at about 110 right now, I believe. I mean, I was looking at it, last night. It got as high as 120 to 1. I mean, that's extraordinary if you think about it throughout history where the silver to gold ratio has been.
Yeah, and for those who don't know what we're talking about, that means it takes, right now, 110 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. That's what that ratio is. Now, what that means is the higher that ratio goes, and we're at all-time highs. It hit 121, I think, was the all-time high.
Oh, wow.
That means silver is extremely undervalued.
Correct.
It also means if that's downward pressure on both. When the gold and silver ratio in history has risen, usually there's a crash in those markets afterwards. Not always, but it's a pretty good indicator. For those who say, and I don't think people should rush out and get gold or silver. Most people can't afford gold, and silver is pretty expensive.
Silver's
right
better.
now.
I always tell people silver is better than gold, in my opinion. If you're going to choose one of the two, I always go with silver.
Oh, absolutely. With this ratio, which I think could go actually to 150, 160.
Wow.
During this crisis. Right now, most people, I would say, don't buy silver because there's such a premium. That's another thing people went into with this crisis. All of a sudden, you couldn't get silver and gold. Nowhere. You couldn't get it online. You couldn't get it in stores. These coin places that sell gold and silver, you couldn't get it unless some would give it to you if you were an established customer of theirs.
Or it takes a while. I mean, I know a couple of dealers and they'll say like 4 weeks, delivery. It's still, they're really slammed, but you'll eventually get it. Yeah.
But during normal times, the premium on an ounce of silver, let's just say that the spot price of silver is $15. You can get silver for $15.69 if you buy, 50 of them or whatever. Now that premium has been as high as $10 or $12 over the price of silver. So silver went down to 13, but you couldn't get it if you could get it for under $21. You could not get physical gold, silver under $21.
Correct.
But I really think there's going to be a much when silver goes under $10 again, and I think it will. This is just a guess, but I think it's going to go $7 to $10. That's when you load up on it because the gold silver ratio is going to be enormous. So then when that ratio comes back to normal, let's say it goes to 50 to 1. So let's just say you got 100 ounces worth when it was $10. So you spent $1,000. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
You spent
if you're getting at a spot, I mean, good luck if it goes to 10, getting it at 10 either. That's a whole other scenario. Do you think you're going to be able to get precious physical metals at the spot price? I doubt it. If it goes to $8, do you think you're going to be able to get physical silver for $8 an ounce or even 10 for that matter? I'll bet you there'll be premiums on it.
Oh, yeah. The cheaper it's gotten during this crisis, the more the premiums have gone up.
Correct. So I always tell people, I say, look at the price. You probably, even though the price might crash and it might be low, you probably won't be able to pick it up that way. You could buy some paper contract, which I do not advise. Don't buy any paper gold, no paper silver. But if you want the physical stuff, you probably won't be able to get it at that price. I agree with you, waiting out. I always tell people, though, that it's important to have some. Don't go crazy and load up. But if you have nothing, if you have no precious metals, get some. Would you not recommend for people to get anything? Like if they're in a scenario, they've never looked at gold, they've never looked at silver, they have no precious metals, they've got everything kind of in their 401k or they've got, money in their bank account or whatever. What would you, again, for you personally, what would you do if you were in that situation where you have zero, you have no precious metals, and you've got a bit of cash? What would you advise if you were a financial advisor, which you're not? But again, what would you advise?
This is a different answer than I would have given you back in, let's say, 2010. But it just shows you experience of living through this stuff.
Sure.
I would say get junk silver first.
There you go. That's good. That's the best bang for your buck. Junk silver is great.
Absolutely.
Maybe explain what junk silver is, because people think it's junk if they don't know anything.
It's definitely not junk.
Yeah.
Explain. It could be 1964 and before coins in the United States, like quarters, dimes, 50-cent pieces, dollars, because they had 90% silver. 1964 and before. That's one. That's junk silver. Silverware. Any other thing that is silver, not silver plated. Silver plated is almost worthless because what you have to do to get the little teeny bit of silver out of that isn't worth the extraction. So actually sterling, silver, plates or anything like that, real silverware, those are worth money. And but junk silver is the cheapest way to go. I think a dime is worth, I'm just taking a guess, 50 cents.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So you'd probably spend 55 or 60 cents right now on it. You're always going to pay a premium, and you always have to pay a little on the flip side. But when silver goes to the moon, and I think silver is going to go to several $100s an ounce,
okay,
that junk silver is going to be worth maybe $50.
Correct.
Or whatever, you
Correct.
paid 50 cents for it. It's going to go up tenfold. And when that gold silver ratio comes back down, let's just say, throw a number out there, 50 to 1. Now let's just say you had, in our first scenario, I said you get $1,000 worth of silver. You get 100 coins.
Yep.
But that 100 coins right now won't even buy an ounce of gold. It'll buy about 90% of an ounce of gold.
Sure.
When it comes down to 50 to 1, you can then buy 2 ounces of gold.
Correct. Yeah.
And gold is going to be reset probably to $10,000 or higher an ounce eventually.
Yes.
So you can maybe take that $1,000 and turn it into $2,000 worth of real. Here's the things. Precious metals hold their true value. And because people don't get suits anymore, I think it's a dumb relationship, but it's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Where a $20.
It's when I was born, 1972. It was $35 an ounce in 72. That's when I was born. And with $35, you could get like a nice Armani suit and 2 pairs of men's shoes, right? And they'll say right now in 2020, I mean, $35 will hardly buy you a t-shirt, but the same ounce of gold in 2020, if you convert it to cash, you can go out and purchase that, men's suit and 2 pairs of shoes.
Yes, absolutely.
It's phenomenal. I explain that to people all the time. Or some people will say, well, gold and silver. If you guys see it going up, it's not that gold and silver are going up. It means the dollar is going down. I explain that all the time to people, and they'll look at it that way. But yeah, the purchasing power is important, because if you throw money in the bank for 10 years, you've got less when it comes out, even if you've got interest, because the, inflation is killing it, right? And the devaluing of what's going on now, it's killing it. So it's better for you to store something long term that's got real, like when we were talking before in hour 1, Rich was talking about money. And I mean, it's divisible, it's a store of value. There's all these markers that what makes something valuable. Again, currency is not, it's paper, it's junk. You know what I mean? It actually loses value over time. It doesn't store value. So look at something that stores value. Again, if you're not for precious metals and all that, think of something that has value. Land has value. There's certain things that are, inherently that have value. Currency and fiat systems that the government has done is not one of them. It does not hold its purchasing power over decades.
Yes, here's the way to look at it. But I'm not saying do this first. I want to say what to do first, in my opinion.
Sure, in your opinion, yeah.
Real wealth, all real wealth in the entire world comes from the ground.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I always look at it gold and silver. You can say what you want about it, but God created it. I mean, it's literally part of creation. Fiat and currency is man-made. It's out of paper. It's something that they've made something illusionary for the world to look at it as it's valuable. I mean, it's literally like an IOU. Like you said, it's debt. It's debt-based a system, where something, like you said, out of the ground is real value. Go on.
Right. So, yeah, that's why it's called real estate. Now, it doesn't mean these things don't go way up and way down in price. But if a house goes way down in price, that means that the purchasing power actually decreased, it decreased. Means there's less money flow going to people. So the same amount of people that can afford a medium-sized house is always pretty much the same.
Yes.
And what I mean, so during the housing crisis, the people that could afford a medium-sized house decreased a lot because people were thrown out of work. So what happened to compensate? Real estate prices dropped, and when they equalized again, the same amount of people could buy a medium house price, which was now $300,000 cheaper than what it was 4 years ago.
Correct. Yeah.
And these are just cycles that keep repeating and repeating.
1980s is a massive one. I tell people all the time. In the 1980s, when silver got to its all-time high and real estate crashed, you could get a medium, like a medium family home for 1,000 ounces of silver.
Yes, and I've heard experts predict this time.
Yep.
500 ounces.
500 or less. Some are saying 300, but let's just go large. Let's just say even if still it was 1,000 ounces, which most people believe will be about 500 ounces or less. But even at 1,000 ounces, if you actually do the math on it, can you imagine for picking up a house for that price? At $15 an ounce, it still seems, especially in some markets, depending where you live. But what I'm saying is that's the type of thing. There's a time and a place to actually exchange it. I tell people all the time that, just hold on to it forever. It is real money. I mean, there's a time, especially like you mentioned with real estate, if it crashes 60, 70%, if you're sitting on any type of precious metals of any type of value, you might want to convert that at a certain point for a home. Free and clear, no mortgage, depending on how much you have. But again, remember, no mortgage, free and clear, a home for, they're saying about 500 ounces of silver. And I mean, just do the math on $15 an ounce, or let's just say 20 because there's premiums. Let's say $20 an ounce. Do the math based on 500. Imagine getting a home for your family right across, no mortgage. I mean, these are the things that you say it's impossible. It happened in 1980s. It's happened before in history. So it's what happens is when these things go up, real estate and everything's going to go down. Not to mention how in the world are people going to be able to afford a mortgage when the banks already are raising qualifications? They're saying you need a 700 credit score, you need 20% down. Well, how many people how many first-time home buyers for a $500,000 or a $400,000 home? How did they come up with 20% down? That means that real estate has to come down to reality. It's got to come down to a point where people can afford it, especially when they're looking at it logistically that way. Banks got to a point where they're like, how much do you make? Oh, you make, $15,000 a year. Yeah, you qualify for that $400,000 home, right? They just threw you into anything. They didn't care. They just wanted to get everyone into debt. So that's going to change as well too. What do you think? What do you think when it comes to, real value, especially when it comes to like real estate in those times that you do see great opportunities?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier as far as, people want to look at this as gloom and doom. I say look at it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
But look first at you and your family's needs.
Yes.
Because like mine are different than 2008. I live alone now with a dog. And during this crisis, I realized, wait a minute, I've got months worth of emergency food that I've had probably for 10 years just sitting in a box. I've got a Berkey water filter, so I got all the clean water and food I need for months.
Always get that first. Food and water, get that first before any of the stuff we're talking about, for sure. Absolutely.
Right. But what hit me was I have a finicky dog. He won't eat dog food. Oh. So I was like, I'm not worried about myself, but how am I going to take care of him if all of a sudden, because when I went to the store and saw 70% of the shelves gone, the product gone, and then and then there was no meats. Because dogs they eat meat, and I either get him chicken or hamburger or whatever, and I cook it up and cut it up or whatever. Like, I need to start storing in the freezer for him. And so everybody's situation is different. You may have someone with special needs, or do you have whatever that is? Can you do it if a special caretaker can't come and do that? Do you have special medical needs where you need prescriptions where you might not be able to get it? Have you maybe researched something natural that may help with the same condition? It's just the idea is really to have alternatives.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's here, folks. It's like I told people in 2008. Actually, I started talking. I'm always early. I was telling people in 2006 and 2007, this is ending. You need to prepare. You need to. What would happen if you lost your job? And people got it. Finally, and when we had Lehman Brothers, they said that was it. And people thought it was nuts. No, you're crazy. It doesn't affect my work. I'm like, it will. And sure enough, the next year they got it. But you know what? By 2014, I'm doing videos and people are like, you're just fear-mongering, never going to happen.
Yeah.
They fixed it last time. Like, oh man, here we go again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think even having this show, people are going to be like, guys, relax, man. It's looking good. Stocks are up. You know what I mean? They're injecting money. They're sending money to everyone. Everyone's going back to a job. Everything's going back to normal here in the next 2-3 months. It was just that coronavirus, right? But once we deal with that, everything is going to be back probably even stronger than it was before. I mean, I think that's where everyone's mentality is like they're looking at that big bad virus. It's the cause of all these ills in the world, you know, as far as unemployment and all that. But they don't really realize that, you know, if the economy was strong and if we were a nation of savers, you know, it wouldn't affect the markets that much. It just wouldn't. You know, what you're seeing is a complete fragile you're seeing a fragile system. And you could say, well, I mean, everyone is, you know, affected the same way because they're all leveraged. They're all in debt. They're all, you know, no country out there has got a positive balance sheet.
That's correct.
That's what you're seeing. I explained that. It could be anything. It could be a typhoon. It could be a massive earthquake that rips through. I mean, but again, it was the coronavirus. It's the pin that popped the bubble. And again, this bubble, you're seeing it. I mean, it's breathtaking to see the lengths of how many areas and sectors they're bailing out. I mean, you said 2008, it was a select few, right? Where the money went. This is going to everyone. And I mean, people are just lining up. It doesn't matter if they need it or not. They're like, I'll take a couple billion. I'll take a few million. I mean, now you see these, I don't know if you noticed, did you see that Harvard and some chains started returning money because of all the outlash, you know, because they had so much reserves in cash and endowments, and yet they're getting handouts. I mean, so people were outraged, like that Shake Shack or something. Apparently, they got a provision and said, well, we have less than 500 employees per location. They've got something like 14,000 people that work for Shake Shack. And apparently, they took like 10, I forget how much it was. It was millions and millions of dollars. And the outcry was so severe that they started returning it, right? And that's what you're going to see. But again, everyone, you don't think that there's fraud going on behind the scenes that aren't getting caught? Or man.
Think about it. I mean, that was the rich who didn't need it. Harvard especially.
Oh my goodness!
They have so many endowments.
I know.
But they're connected a lot to China. But anyway,
yeah,
that's a different story. But even it's the rich that get richer off of our backs.
And the crumbs, and the people are getting the crumbs because it's like a slap in the face. When I first saw the fact that they were going to give like $1,200 and they said that should last them for a few months. I mean, they uttered that. I'm like, how disgraceful to think that that's going to be okay for someone to live on $1,200 for a few months. You know, like in my country, they gave like a 4-month plan initially. It wasn't like a 1-month payment. It was like, okay, here's the next 4 months, right? And we're giving $2,000 to every single person or whatever. Regardless, America, when they first came out, it was like a one-time payment. And I'm like, what? Right? This is going to last longer than just like a week. And not to mention, how long is it going to take for people to get that money? People still haven't got the money. There's a lot of people saying they haven't got the money yet, right? Maybe they're not in the system as far as electronically and they're waiting for their check, but there's still a lot of people crying foul. But like you said, they're probably going to do like another emergency thing. And the question is, are we moving towards like a universal type system? I mean, that's what the Democrats would love, right? And I mean, they're going to, when they start campaigning, they're going to promise the world. What do you think their promises are going to be? Now we've seen, this stuff. I think it's going to be insane. Like it's going to be free education, free healthcare, free universal income. I mean, and here's the tragic thing. A lot of people right now are making more money sitting at home watching Netflix than they are at their jobs. Now, all of a sudden you get the green light. You can come back to work. For a lot of people, if they're making more money sitting at home than they are, going out, what do you think people are going to choose, right? Especially if you get people on a system like that, right? Where they're making more money than they were, with minimum wage or whatever. Or I don't know. Some people, I guess, in the States are making fairly low, income brackets. But I don't know. What do you think is going to happen as far as, it resumes as far as the economy? Do you think a lot more people are going to be on the system?
Yeah, well, it's a definite incentive not to go back to work. So in Arizona, it's horrible. What a weekly unemployment check is normally $300, which is, I think that's horrendously low.
Yes.
But the government's adding $600 to that roughly, so we're talking $900.
Correct.
So now you're talking that's tax free. Really.
Yeah, now you're making more money than probably your job out there. A lot of people, that,
right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but we just flipped into back to a employees market where it's going to be tough to get a job. And when they hire these people back, even if they think their business is coming back, it's not coming back where it was even if they know that at the start. Let's say you were making, I don't know, 800 a week at a restaurant. The restaurant knows it's not going to go back right away, so they could hire somebody else and say, well, you know what, he was around long enough, or she was around long enough. I gave them raises from $7 an hour to $14 an hour. I know I can hire people again at minimum wage, because there's so many people in the workforce looking for jobs. That goes back to supply and demand also.
Correct.
You have too many people chasing too few jobs. It's an employer's market. Wages go down.
Correct.
Meanwhile, the government's, they're going to extend that 4-month unemployment. I guarantee it.
Sure. I think so too.
I think bonus of 600. Yeah, that's ad infinitum. That's not going away.
No, yeah, I think you're right on that, and I think that it's going to prevent a lot of people from going back to their jobs, because they're like, why? I'm making more money now sitting at home, right? I think a lot of people, especially on the levels of what they're increasing, because they're adding a lot more now to the mix, and I think that's going to cause a lot of repercussions, and they're wanting everything to restart. But I'm just not seeing that, a lot of businesses are gone for good, and a lot of jobs are gone forever. I think that, we're dealing with a situation. There's no V recovery. There's like a slow, gradual thing. But I also look like you, kind of in the sense that, we might be looking at a W happening, right? Where it almost appears that things are good, and then all of a sudden, it just crashes again, right? And it's no amount of stimulus or printing or whatever is going to help, right? I think that's what we're going to see. But we're at a point now where they're just going to keep printing and printing, or actually putting zeros and zeros in a computer, right? And they're just going to try. And my question before was, on the other side of the thing with the Democrats, how much more are they going to promise to the world? Because when things are bad like this, usually in election cycles, this is what they do in elections, is they promise the world, right? Even more so now in a situation that's dire like this. What do you think is going to happen on that side? What do you think they're going to try to fight for, as far as telling the people what they'll do if they elect them?
Universal income, I'm sure. But you're going to get that from the right also, because they don't want to lose the power they have. It's kind of interesting that we have divided government right now with all this crisis. So they're both, I think, going to be promising the world. Nobody wants to look like they're holding back funds during a crisis.
Correct.
And the left is hell-bent, along with the media, of making this crisis, I think, worse than it is.
Yes. And
trying to drag it out. Any talk of anything working? How about the talk of hydroxychloroquine
Yep.
working? It's so many people are reporting that, so many doctors are reporting that it works, and they have one probably fake news report that it didn't work, or it was bad for somebody, or whatever.
Sure. Yep.
Boy, they harped on that.
Yep. Yeah, if Trump said it was garbage, don't take it, the whole world, the media would be praising it, and they would be like, storming that drug right through the streets. Like we said in hour one, whatever Trump says, they will do the exact opposite. If he had come out and said it's garbage, don't trust it, it's awful, what do you think they would be doing in the media right now? They'd be praising it. They'd be talking about reports on how it works, and we see this all the time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the elite know it works. I think Boris. Prime Minister Boris over there in the UK.
Well, I'm suspicious about it, because I had one video, and it was a mirrored video from Peak Prosperity. But I had a video that was banned, and I got a warning. I got a strike based on the fact that it basically had a question mark. Does it work? And I used that in there, and they banned it. And they gave me a warning and a strike. So what I'm saying is, who knows? I'm just going to say that, if they're striking videos and taking them down, you got to kind of look a little further what's going on there, right? It was interesting that Trump started bringing it up. But like I said, if Trump had said it was bad, the whole world right now would be like completely, going crazy and saying it's the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. Well, the latest thing was the scientists came out and said light and moisture kills it.
Yeah.
And immediately the media was like, well, how do you know this? Well, take New Orleans, for example. They had it bad, and they have a lot of sunlight there.
Yeah.
Not in the winter, they don't.
Yeah, I'm still skeptical on that. Brazil, and there's lots of different countries out there where it's really, we'll see. That's great news if that happens again. They're still going to do the fear-mongering about, next fall, the second wave, right? Everyone's going to be in the state of perpetual fear based on the second wave. The second wave will be worse than the first. Everyone were, they'll really play that up, right? But I think that, in an election year, I think the big thing is going to be promising the world to people. Both, like you said, both sides. It's either socialism light or communism socialism, but either way, it's that's the reality. But if all of a sudden you move towards communism, I mean, America won't even look the same in 10 years. I mean, if you start moving that direction, and they're hyper driving it. I mean, you just look at the rhetoric and the way they're talking, it's just, yeah, that's why people should definitely be, protesting and standing up, because I'll tell you one thing, it's going to be a scary world, man, if they get in, especially like a Bernie Sanders or like a Biden. Speaking of Biden, let's talk about Biden, for example, because I posted it on my Facebook and I got all sorts of comments. It was actually interesting, but I mentioned the conversation we had the other night, and I think you and I both agree, come on. There's no way Biden is going to be their choice. I mean, and somebody said, well, wait a minute, maybe he is, but what's going to happen is the vice, whoever comes in as the vice, something will happen with Biden, and then that vice will be groomed to take over. Oh, possibly, but we at least agree that I'm sure they're looking at Biden saying, heck, man, this guy has got dementia. He's not there half the time. He doesn't even know where he is. How in the world could Biden be the guy that goes against Trump? Because we all know that Trump is going to eat him for dinner.
Yeah, it's not going to be Biden, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I mean, if they want to totally throw away the election, sure, they don't want to do that.
No,
this is their big chance back up. They're so against Trump. You think they're going to put up somebody that has no chance whatsoever?
Yeah,
they're already starting with the fake polls that Biden would win in all the swings. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Until this year, when they really manipulated it, he never won a state ever. He never got more than, I think, 1 or 2% ever. Anytime he ever, even before he had dementia. But everything was so coordinated, and people were like, well, he'll have the most delegates, Rich. He's got to be it. No, you don't understand. The Democrats changed the rules after they cheated Bernie in 2016.
Yeah.
They changed the rules to where the delegates aren't bound, even on the first ballot. They can vote for it. They can vote for Pluto on the planet Pluto, and he would be the nominee. They're not bound to anybody. So the idea that they have to stick with Biden is just crazy. I personally think, and I know people are going to think it's nuts, that Hillary Clinton is going to be running against Trump again. And she has been setting it up, and everybody else has been too. There's even been articles out there, if Hillary Clinton is drafted, she would surely run. She wouldn't turn it down. And no, this whole thing, I think, is planned to have her back again. And what does she have to do? She doesn't have to be out there right now answering questions about Benghazi and the Trump dossier and all the other stuff that's come out since she left the scene.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to answer any questions. She just walks in. Oh, and here's the thing. Did you know that during this crisis, they changed the Democratic convention to a date in August?
I didn't.
I don't know. Well, they changed it. They said because of the coronavirus. But guess what day they happened to pick? The day that they will actually nominate their person.
What day?
It's the centennial of the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote.
Wow.
And I don't think that's a coincidence either.
That's interesting because, I mean, you were saying the other night that you possibly think that it could be a Hillary-Michelle Obama duo.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Although the more I think about it, the more I think Michelle isn't going to go anywhere near it.
So, yeah, and I actually heard someone actually saying today that she had said no or something like that. But what about like a Biden Hillary, where all of a sudden something happens to Biden and then Hillary just takes over? Like what I'm saying is, but you actually think that there's no way it's just going to be someone brand new that's just going to be like a surprise come out of nowhere?
No, I don't think so. I think that the big hope they had for that was Bloomberg or whatever.
Yeah.
And you see how that worked out.
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, it's laughable to think that Biden. I mean, he tried to come out a few times during this whole coronavirus thing, and I mean, I don't know if you caught it, but it was laughable. I mean, he's stumbling and mumbling, and you know what I mean? Like it was bad. I mean, even the Democrats themselves were saying it was bad. They're saying he should stay in his basement. You know?
Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't know if it's an act or he really is that bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you gotta see, like, I mean, again, some of those things that he was doing, though, I think, were they not live or were they pre-recorded? Because, you know, if they're live, I mean, there's nothing you can do to hide it, right? If it's pre-recorded, you'd never let it air. But if it's live, if he's doing a live kind of thing, then, I mean, who knows? But, I mean, come on. Some of that stuff that he was uttering and saying and, you know, when his wife comes up and he's like, oh, honey. And he's like, oh, like, you know, you seen that clip where he just sits there? He's just like, he's frozen in time. And he's like, he doesn't even know where he is. Anyways, we all agree that there's no way that it could be him. Because, I mean, just think of how devastating of a debate that will be. I mean, it's funny. I hope it will be. It'll be fun to watch. But, I mean, really, this is the best they have to go up against Trump? They're so deathly afraid of him getting another term. Here's a question, though. If the economy is crap, real bad, nothing is turning around, it's just awful, it's like it's Trump's worst nightmare, do you think Trump will take it? If it's just bad every which way you look. I mean, economy, numbers are getting worse. Like, if hypothetically, let's just say that they couldn't prevent the crash and it happens, do you actually think it would be Trump?
Yeah, I still do.
You do, eh?
Uh-huh.
And the reason why?
Because I think they're going to, the people are going to see that he handled this crisis better probably than anybody else on the other side could.
Gotcha. Well, like I said, I definitely want it to be Trump. I mean, I don't care who they put up against Trump, even if it's a surprise. I definitely will want Trump more so than the Communist Party that's coming the direction of America. I mean, it's horrifying, when you start looking at the level and what they're trying to get across. I mean, they were all upset when he closed down the border, for goodness sakes. They're telling everyone to stay home and be safe. They're saying, stay home, be safe, but yep, let's let all the illegals and immigrants come in. I mean, I'm just like, what? Like, it is just so brutal that you're at one breath you're saying everyone stay home and be safe, but let's let other people from other countries come in, like Mexico, which they haven't even apparently got to their peak yet.
Yeah, it's totally nuts. It really is.
Yeah, it's really crazy. It's really crazy. Like all of a sudden things happen like that, and everyone's thinking he's like this. And the funny thing was, they thought he was such a narcissist, warmonger. It's Trump or the highway. And then all of a sudden, through this whole thing, Trump is just like, it's up to the states. It's up to the governors. Yes. And then not only that, you've got Democratic governors praising Trump at times, and boy, do they hate that. I don't know if you ever saw some of the things, like The View one time had a Democrat on governor or something like that on one of their shows, and they're like, yeah, you tell us about Trump and how awful he is. He's like, actually, I can't. Trump's been really good through this. He's got us the supplies we need, and the look on their face is like priceless.
Yeah, I'm sure that went over well.
Oh, it's priceless. It's priceless seeing that. But I mean, it was surprising to actually see, like, what was it? The governor there from New York, or even California. California, of all people, was sitting there saying, hey, I'd love to say something, but you know what? We got the ship. We got the supplies. Trump's been pretty good through this whole thing. But they absolutely hate it. You just see the rage in their eyes. You just see them like turning red almost. They just don't want anything to be positive. It's like the polarization is just insane. It's just unbelievable. But I always tell people, I say, wherever you stand on Trump, down the road, when it's all said and done, you're going to miss someone like him. I mean, it's refreshing at the very least, right? I mean, having someone talk the way he does, I mean, to me, it's a great time to be alive, especially when it comes to someone like Trump, because you're never in your lifetime going to see someone quite like him.
No.
Nope. Never. It's never going to happen again. So I tell people, regardless where you are, just enjoy it. Enjoy the show, at least. You know what I mean? You can say what you want, but again, there's a lot of good coming. Again, it's socialism light or communism. Take your pick. So if you're sitting there saying, both are bad, both are evil, it doesn't matter. You can't stop it. I mean, the system's going to continue on regardless. So it is one of those things where it's important. I would say specifically for me, it's always been a big one on the moral issues, right? I mean, always look at that as far as someone that's, keeping things at bay as far as morally, right? Someone that's standing up for the life of children versus, aborting more children. I mean, that alone should be an easy voting choice for people, in my opinion, especially if you stand for the sanctity of life. You would think, for sure. But again, people get caught up in all these different things and all that kind of stuff. But, leading into, next year and stuff, when this stuff kind of calms down, do you think that there will be an investigation, like an independent investigation? What do you think is going to happen with China as far as the investigation on their handling on the virus itself? Like, do you think it's going to be a joint effort with multiple countries? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I do. I see it's actually starting. There's already people in Congress saying they're going, not the Democrats, but Republicans saying this needs to be investigated. And I can pretty much guarantee the other countries are going to say the same thing, because they've been devastated because China, if what we're told is true, and that's always a caveat in today's world, they knew what it was and what it was doing and held that information from the world. So that's I guess in international law, that I would think that would make them liable. In fact, they are by law supposed to report that because they're part of the World Health Organization. That's one of the things they have to. I think it's within 24 hours. They have to notify, and they didn't do that.
They didn't. They did. I mean, you can start looking into it and seeing, and even just the stuff they destroyed. Even there were whistleblowers, that they got the stuff out when they were trying to shut everyone up. And I mean, it's evident for anyone to see. And again, when you're looking at all the countries being affected the way they are, I mean, people are going to be angry, right? There's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be investigations. Not to mention that, China, where they're sitting and standing in the world stage, I think that's coming to an end as well, too, right? As far as being as strong as they were, as far as trade. Like we already mentioned before, medically speaking, most people are not going to be getting their medical equipment done in China anymore. Especially the fact of relying on it. They might, get supplies and surplus and all that, but they're not going to just, these global chains, like we talked about, like the food chains and like different things, that's all going to change. That's all going to change. I mean, that's as evident as anybody could imagine. People are moving away, and it's a good thing. I mean, for America to create more factories, and build more things is a good thing. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that nothing really is built in America again. I mean, as far as manufacturing, it's so pathetic. Do you know that like all the Michelin and all the Goodyear, all those plants shut down? Do you know that tires aren't even made in America anymore? You'd think, well, like tires, I mean, it's rubber. How hard is that, right? They closed down every plant in America. They're all made over in Asia and stuff.
Yeah, and that when you talk about, and steel is another one.
Steel.
That has finally started to come back. But these are national security issues. What if all of a sudden we need to build tanks and ships? And this is something that most people don't know. In fact, it hasn't really come out public too much. But under the Obama administration, he was allowing substandard steel to come in that we were using for making weapons with and ships. And you just can't do that. So if you get hit by a bomb or something on a ship, it's going to fall apart if it's some substandard steel. Prescriptions. These are actually, I mean, think of it, if there was no way, if something happened that we had, let's just say that there's a drug out there that would cure this virus.
Sure.
And, there's already talk that the military is having issues, especially on ships, because people are coming down with the virus. Well, what if there was a cure, but we couldn't get it because China lived up to their threat of not sending that stuff to us? That's a national security issue.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden your military, they're all sick, so they can't fight.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it's very scary.
But people don't think that through, so they think, oh, yeah, it's okay, we get things cheaper from China.
Yeah.
But there's so many things in our national security issues, so many things.
Yeah, and this is what is going to wake up the world. I mean, not just America, but many other countries. I mean, I heard there were a lot of infighting going on with the EU because when things went crazy with Italy, they were like, well, sorry, we got to protect our own, But they're like, but, you're supposed to send us some medical supplies. They're like, sorry, we can't, So I think everyone is going to be in the same position where they're like, look, man, even just not even medical, not even for like pandemics or emergencies. I think, like you said, military-wise, I mean, the fact that they don't make tires in America, how in the world would they be able to actually create something, quickly if a war broke out? Let's just say all of a sudden it got hostile. I mean, what are they going to do? What's America going to do? Everyone's talking about, oh, they got all these things. What if all of a sudden you popped all the tires? Then how long is it going to take to make tires? I mean, you're going to have to start up from scratch, a whole plant making tires again and all these chains. So, yeah, I think that a lot of things are going to change after this, and it's not just America. I think many countries. That's why I say I think we're moving further away from globalization. We're going back to localization. I think that's going to be the mantra going forward, is supporting your local businesses even. I think there's going to be this huge kind of revival moving towards that. Not to mention in this time, and I want to mention this for sure, is, and I've said this from day one while I've started to ring the alarm bell, but really I believe ultimately God is sovereign above all, and I mean this is like a shaking. This is a judgment to all nations of the world. I believe that there's a time to look up and to draw close to Him. I think in anything that we say or talk and recommend, really the number one thing you need to do is really draw close to him in these times. You got to draw close to him and ask him, what he wants you to do. That really is what it's all about. A lot of the stuff that's happening, the calamities, the wars, all of the things, the judgments that take place in the world, it's because people, they steer very far away from him. They move towards a very demoralized society. I mean, America, the joke was always, if God doesn't send massive judgment to America, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, you think about the level of murder that's done, in the womb. You think about the sexual, perverse, demoralized society in Hollywood that is basically spewed towards the whole world. I mean, think about all the countries that watch Hollywood movies, right? But you just think of all these levels of what America represented from a moral standpoint, not an economic or a military standpoint, but from a moral standpoint. Do you think, that there shouldn't be judgment, but not just them? The entire world, I believe, is very strongly emphasized here. Never in the history of the world have we seen the whole world come to a standstill, right? This is like divine. This is almost supernatural in the sense that you can't just say, well, man did this. Man is not sophisticated enough to actually coordinate a complete shutdown of the whole world. Don't think that he is. And that there's always, like Rich had said before, there's always good that comes from this. There's a lot of positivity. So even though we're talking about this and some people think we're doom and gloom, we're not. We're saying there's a lot of beautiful changes that are going to take place. People are it's going to bring out the best of people. Sure, there's going to be some bad stuff like riots and different things. But overall, neighbors are going to start talking to one another again.
Well, yeah.
There's going to be a lot of good stuff that will come from this. We won't be so self-centered in the sense that we're in our phones all the time.
Yeah, and not only that, but people move to God during bad times, and they move away from God in extended good times. It's just the way it's been throughout history.
100%. So I always sit there and say, say what you want, but again, a lot of beautiful things happen, and a lot of people draw close to him, and he desires that nobody be lost. So he in the whole scheme of things, and that's another thing too, is that he might be pushing back their evil agendas in ways that you can't see. Sometimes look at the other side of the coin, not just the one directional. Look at the positive that can take place. And if you're a son and daughter of him and you're a believer, ask him, what is your role in this? I mean, we're ambassadors for him. We're ambassadors for the truth. People are going to be fearful. They're going to be scared. They're going to feel lost. They're going to say, where are the answers? We have the answers for them. The way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him, Jesus. And it's something that's so important for the world to understand. There truly is a Savior. There is someone that can they can lay their burdens at his feet. And I think it's incredibly important for people to understand that the world will get darker. There's no doubt. But there is a light in the world, and he has sent them to be there as representatives and ambassadors for him. So we need to understand that we have a role to play. We can't just sit in our homes and be scared. And even if you're at a point where you're like, well, I'm not going to be scared, understand that there's a role for you to play in this. And again, he's going to protect you. I mean, fear not, it says, don't fear man. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. So it doesn't matter how wicked man is or what they're doing. I understand he is fully in control. And there's a plan for this. He's, purposed it. All these things will take place. And to me, it's an exciting time in history. The very fact that we're living, that we were chosen to be born in and live through a period of time such as this. 2020 will go down in the history books. It will resonate and ripple throughout time. Do you ever stop and think about that, Rich, that we're living through one of the most profound times in human history as far as a worldwide scale?
Absolutely. It's the same thing as I think of people that lived, they call the greatest generation World War II. That's what I really related to, probably because I studied that a lot. It's almost, I wish almost I could have lived through that period just to understand it. And there's something about that generation that and there's other different times in history, the same thing. The Renaissance comes to mind. That was a good thing. But even some of the bad things, it's a lot of people, just probably 20, 30 years from now are going to be saying, oh man, you were alive and witnessed 2001.
Yep.
And then you were alive during the great worldwide pandemic.
Yep.
And survived it. It'll grow these urban legends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I survived it. I don't know how, but I did.
Yeah, you went through it. You went through that time because I mean, like you, I definitely think it's this whole thing is going to last, a decade. Like some people will say, it's short, it's going to be a couple of years. I'm starting to think, anywhere from 5 to 7 years conservatively, but I think that it's going to be a change for the whole world, over the next decade from 2020 to 2030. I think it's going to be a massive shift. With many, many people, many economies, many countries And, that's just the way it's going to be. It's going to take a long time. Even if you initiate a whole new standard and a whole new reset, it takes a while to get up, to start getting up to levels where we were at. And again, I don't even think in our lifetime we're ever going to see the levels where we were at as far as quote unquote prosperity, as far as the way people were living, right? People were living so far above their means, it wasn't even funny, right? They had this illusion. They were driving these Bentleys and they have all these mansions. But again, it was all in debt. They didn't own it. They didn't own it, right? That was the thing, is like everyone's like, oh, that person's got a really nice house and nice car. Well, most times they didn't even own it. They leased it through their business. It wasn't really theirs, so it was a big illusion, keeping up with the Jones or whatever they say. And I just think that it's going to take a very long time, not just for America, but many countries to get up to that point again, just because there's going to be such a massive jolt to the system. Like I said, the coronavirus is kind of like that ripple, that wave. Well, the tsunami is still coming. I mean, is that a good analogy you would say?
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to that tsunami, it's not that, oh my goodness, everyone dies and starves. Not at all. I tell people all the time, it's not the level like that. It can be for some people, but I just say that your whole standard of living will change. I mean, it will be a luxury probably to go to a restaurant or go on a vacation. It will just be a time where people hunker down, they save, they're going to spend more time with their family. A lot of good is going to come from it. So if you're in that scenario, understand that it's probably going to be very beneficial overall for your family, in those times. But again, it can be stressful. And it can cause a lot of friction, but it doesn't have to. That's why we're saying on the show, start preparing yourself. If anything, if you don't know which way to go and you don't want to listen to us, you think we're way off, then just start looking around and saying, hey, what do other people starting to say? Like, how do you protect yourself if, hypothetically, it does crash? I mean, seriously crash. The whole world economic system. If it crashes, where am I going to be safe? What should I do? And we were talking about, be prepared, have some food, water. That's just smart. I mean, that's not being, a crazy psycho prepper. It's just being smart, saying no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. It's peace of mind. I mean, as someone that is basically the spiritual leader, I'm the head of my household. I have a peace of mind knowing that I can take care of my family no matter what. It's not that I'm like psycho and thinking of all these things. Like you, Rich, I've had food storage for years and years, right? And it didn't bother me that I haven't had to use it yet. It's peace of mind, knowing that, even if I never have to use it, it doesn't matter. It was very, a small investment to have that there. Worst case scenario, we can tap into that dehydrated type of scenario, but we're covered for a long time, even in the worst case scenario,
Yeah.
So
yeah, same here.
It's just peace of mind is all it is. I tell people you don't need to go crazy about it, live in fear, but sometimes it's smart just to be looking and being a good steward with your money, because money, people say, well, the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah, sure. But money, you need money to function. You just do. I mean, for someone to say, well, you're making a big deal out of the money. Well, you're going to need it to survive. I mean, some people say the silliest things sometimes. We're just telling you what is real money. And that's where you need to look at. That's what you need to analyze and decide for yourself what is true savings. At least have some savings. Have some, I'm not even saying that it's all based on gold, silver, or Bitcoin or whatever. I mean, have cash on hand, The very fact that you said, Rich, that most people didn't have $500 of savings. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's insane. Like, that's incredibly dangerous. So hopefully after this, people are going to be like, wow, that was kind of scary. Let's, in the future, at least have $2,500 sitting in savings, Or let's have,
I wouldn't even, personally, I wouldn't even keep it in a bank.
Correct. That's a whole other scenario as well. I mean, it's crazy too. I was just talking about this the other day, but some countries, like my country, Canada, we have laws enacted after the, I think the 2008 or what happened in Greece, or where was the, I forget where it was. Where was it where they went into people's bank accounts?
It was Greece.
It was Greece, sure, yeah. Anyways, the whole thing was after that, a bunch of countries started putting that in place. Well, Canada was one of them. They can do bail-ins of a certain amount in your bank accounts if they need help, if the government needs help. So I don't know if it's in America, legally speaking, but the very fact is that when we're talking about bailouts on this show, understand that like governments are looking more at bail-ins. If they get really in trouble, hey, let's go into people's bank accounts. So like what Rich said is maybe you don't have so much money sitting all in the bank, but also what is going to preserve your purchasing power over time. If you put $100 under your mattress and leave it there for 10 years, you're going to basically probably have $30 or $40 purchasing power in 10 years. right?
Yes.
That's just the reality. But if you basically got $100 of gold, you're probably going to have, if not $100 purchasing power, you might even have a bit more. And even if you don't, even if it's a bit less, you still have about $90, not 30. That's the point.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point there that and with gold, you don't have to buy an ounce of gold. You can buy 1/10 of an ounce or
Correct.
1/20th of an ounce.
That's right.
You'll pay a higher premium, but you got it.
Sure. Yeah.
And
With gold, for sure.
One of the big advantages of gold over silver is you can hide it somewhere in your house and no one can find it. Silver is bulky.
That's true.
I mean, an ounce of silver and an ounce of gold, they're pretty much the same size.
Sure.
Not quite, but they are.
Sure.
But, if you have $100 worth of silver, you're not hiding that too easy. You need a shoebox.
Yeah.
You have a, $1,700 right now worth of gold. You can hide it almost between pages of a book.
Yeah, you can hide it almost in like your iPhone case or something. It's pretty small.
Yes,
I mean, it's pretty small.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about the thickness of a 50-cent piece here.
Yeah, it's
But-
pretty small.
But I'm going to touch on what you said about the banks real quick and what they did during the financial crisis. They changed it here too. Everybody says, well, it's FDIC insured, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation I can't remember the exact number, but when you add up all the accounts, they can probably cover about $10 or even less. It's way insufficient. That's one thing. But they changed the law here to where when you make a deposit, it is actually no longer your asset. It's the asset of the bank.
Oh.
And people don't know that, but that's the law. And I guarantee that's the law. I've read it.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people don't really understand that. So, not saying pull all your money out, but just maybe don't have so much in there at one time.
I wouldn't have tons in there.
Yeah.
And don't store gold or silver in a safety deposit box in a bank.
No, not at a bank.
Because if they ever close, bank runs or whatever, you're not getting that out either.
Yeah.
And they can confiscate what's in there too. That's their property.
Yeah, I remember someone, I think in hour one, someone in the chat had basically said something like, yeah, but what if they come and confiscate your gold, silver, and Bitcoin? And I'm like, well, first of all, there's a lot of reasons why that probably is not going to happen. But really, you got to remember, when they did that confiscation, there were a ton of people that never said anything. I mean, they weren't able to get everyone's. Most people were able to do it. They were paid for their gold. You know what I'm talking about, right? But a lot of people say, well, they're going to do it again. Well, it's a whole different world now. And quite honestly, it's pretty easy to hide. So, I mean, like, it's not like they're going to find it if you hide it well. But I don't know. I'm very pessimistic on the idea that they would try to do gold or silver confiscation. I just do, just based on.
They've never done silver confiscation.
No, they've never done.
The reason why they did gold was, and it should have been illegal, and I'm sure it was. Roosevelt, FDR.
And remember, when we say confiscation, you were still paid for it, and you were paid $10. You were actually paid a little bit more.
Price. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it was still crap. You got the crap end of the deal, because if you had held on to that for like 40 years, you would have found out what a bad deal that was.
Right, but what he instantly did was he bought it at, I think it was $22.50 an ounce. And then once everybody turned it in, he revalued it to 35. And what that created was an instant inflation. Remember, that was a deflationary depression. So he created instant inflation with that because the central bank wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
That was a little trick, and it didn't work, but that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, that's exactly it. 100% when it comes down to that, for sure. Totally. It's unbelievable that, a lot of people are, listening in and they're getting, ideas of what's going on. But I think you and I both agree, Rich, that, we're headed towards some serious times, in the next few years. And quite honestly, most likely, this year we're probably going to have that appearance that things are, like you said, not looking good, but better. Like things are starting to chug up, like it's not going to look as bad as it was, at the lowest levels it was when it first happened.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any coincidences. This is the Hebrew year of corrections. That's what it's called. That's one thing. And I'm not talking astrology here, because God put the constellations and the what we call the planets in there for certain reasons, for signs and for seasons. In fact, that's the main reason for them. And there are people who understand this stuff that have been saying for about, years, that when 2020 gets here, the planets that represent certain things, what we call planets, the lights in the sky, the moving stars, moving lights, They're moving into and out of constellations. They've been there since pretty much the end of the Industrial Revolution. And they're the people that understand what these things mean, like the different, Virgo means the Virgin. We know all the symbolism with that. And just different things like that, Leo, the lion, and Mars's war. But anyway, these things are moving around to where a total change in the mindset of humanity is coming.
Yes.
And that's exactly what this is bringing about. And I remember reading about it, and sure, there's some astrology with it that I just dismiss.
Yeah.
But I was like, wow, what is going to cause such a change around the world to where the old systems, because they're saying the same thing, the old system is going to collapse, and the new, better way of thinking is going to come in, where we're no longer oppressed by governments, we're no longer cheated, we're no longer taxed to death, we have individual freedoms because we won't put up with that anymore. There are good things it's like going through the birth pangs.
Yeah.
At the end of that, there's the birth of the child. It's a good thing.
Yes.
And that's what we're going through right now. Any kind of major change in the world requires the birth pangs. And like you said, it's actually a pleasure that God chose me to be alive during this period, so I could actually, and probably the way I believe, I probably chose to be here at this time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's wild. Like I said, a lot of people don't realize how historic and how big 2020 is going to be in the history books. I mean, it's going to be, you hear about these dates like, the 29, the Great Depression, and you just hear even 9/11. I think 9/11 is going to be, overshadowed compared to 2020, as far as like the date, September and stuff. Like, I just think that this one is just so big, and you're living through it. I'll be, teaching my children about it. They'll be like, my parents went through it, that whole thing. I think it will be incredibly extraordinary through, what transpires, and we're watching this. And again, nobody knows 100% exactly how it's going to go down, what's going to happen. I just think it's smart for people to be ready that things could get worse. Hypothetically, you have to look at that direction. Sure, you could say, well, I think things are going to get better. But also remember, you've at least been woken up to see how quickly your world can change overnight. It might happen again sooner than you think. So anyways, Rich, it's been a real pleasure having you on, especially here with the after show on YouTube. We're now at the 3-hour mark, so we're going to call it a night. But anyways, real pleasure. If there's anything you want to say or maybe mention where people can find out more about you, now's your time to plug it.
Okay, well, I appreciate you having me on, and love the format, love the questions. It was fantastic. And I can be found on YouTube. It's Mr. Thrive and Survive.com, and it's MR, and then Thrive and Survive are all separate. And I talk about flat Earth, and I talk about all kind of different subjects like this and other things, especially recently. And I do 2 live streams. I've been doing Thursday, which is called Open Topic Thursday, where we really go back and forth in the chat, so you can come over and participate. But I'm moving that to Sunday, not this Sunday, but this following Sunday. I hope to start. I'm going to do that. And also Friday night, we have Flat Earth Friday, where we at least talk some Flat Earth, and then we get into other subjects as well. That is 8 o'clock Mountain, or let's call it 8 o'clock Pacific on Friday. And then I'm hoping for 12 noon or 1 p.m. on Sundays starting next week. So hopefully, if you're interested in this type of subjects, come on over. We'd love to have you. It's a great group. It really is a great group that we have on the live streams. And I do uploads as well, regular videos.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a great time. I jumped in there the other night, and it was awesome. The questions and just the correspondence and just the community feel that the chat room had, and people really appreciate it. There's no doubt about it, right? You've done some remarkable work throughout the years, not just with Flat Earth, but even with economics and all the stuff that you forecasted and looked at throughout the years, and help people to be ready for times like this. So again, really appreciate your work, and we're going to have you on again. Like, we're going to do part 2 of this. Maybe we'll do it after the summer or whatever, when we'll see so much more transpire, and we'll be able to be in a better area to see things that are coming down the road as far as politics, what's going to happen with the election. But I think I'm going to be tuning in so much more when it comes to just economically, just with the reset that we're talking about, almost like Great Jubilee that is about to take place for the whole world, where we go to a reset, we get restructured, and it's anyone's guess how that all goes down. But we do know that things are going to change, and it's time to get prepared, be prayerful, mindful, and also look at what good is going to come out of it, not just live in fear about how much bad is going to come. I definitely think that we're going through a period of time for a reason. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned, but also we have nothing to fear, especially if we're secured by Him. So anyways, real pleasure. Thanks everyone for tuning in through Revolution Radio on YouTube. Again, we'll be back next week, same place, same time. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio. I'm your host, Robbie Davidson, and my guest tonight was Richard Hopkins with Mr. Thrive and Survive on YouTube. Everyone, the 24/7 Flat Earth and the Bible channel will be up in about 5 minutes after the show, so tune in there. You'll see it on the channel. It will come up fairly soon after the show. So everyone, blessings everyone. Good night.